Welcome back to Comic Book Historians Podcast with Alex Grant and Jim Thompson. Today we have a very favorite guest, Don McGregor, a writer extraordinaire. We're really happy to have him. We actually did a very lengthy first half of the interview, and now we're here to discuss more about his career, continuing toward the present time. Don, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Alex. How you doing?
Good. So basically, we actually covered a lot of material, the origins of Detectives Inc., Black Panther. We covered a good amount of Killraven. Jim, go ahead.
We finished Panther's Rage, but we didn't get to your next storyline, which was abrupt and cut short. But I want to talk about it because it takes us out of Africa and to basically the Klan. So let's talk about that. How did the next storyline come to be?
Are you afraid to say the title, Jim?
No.
The Panther versus the Klan. This is what we're talking about, right?
That's what we're talking about. I'll say Panther versus the Klan all day long. I'm fine with that.
There we go, Jim. The first thing that I guess I should cover on that is that anytime I'm doing a project and where I'm committed to a series, and that Black Panther was really the first series that I was going to be doing. So I'm considering looking at everything. And in those days, you actually could read all the Black Panther books. I'm trying to figure out how the map of Wakanda, how it looks, so I can have different kinds of stories taking place there. But before I even wrote the first issue of Panther's Rage, I knew that I had that planned for about 10 books. And I thought, well, where am I going to go after I do this story? There's a part of me that I'm already worried about that. And I thought I wanted to do a story about the child going to South Africa. And I realized when I was reading all the early books that Stan and Jack did and whatever books when they brought him to America, they had never mentioned his mother. There was plenty of stuff about his father, but nothing about his mother. And if you read the Panther's Rage books, you realize I didn't mention his mother at all. Because I thought, okay, his mother is been held captive in South Africa. I don't know why. I don't know what the explanation is and why his father has never talked about his mother. But now I've got a storyline to go to in my head. I thought, well, if I stay with the series, I have a place to go to a completely different kind of story. So I'm just not interested in doing the same story over and over again. So I really was going to take him to South Africa. But by the time I finished Panther's Rage, I was going through a divorce. I was going into custody courts to see my daughter. I knew emotionally, it had been very draining. It was an exciting time, but it was a turbulent time and a lot of things that really affected my life and where things were going to go. At the same time, losing the books. At any rate, when I was getting toward the end of it, I realized I can't do the South Africa stuff. I can't do the research that's going to be needed. I just didn't have the energy or the focus. Too much was going on in my life. And it was 1976. It was America's bicentennial. And I thought, well, this would be my birthday gift to America, the Panther versus the Klan. And it was going to be a lot easier for me to write because it was set in the States. And I didn't have to do a lot of research on it. And I had noted at the time that extremism was more prevalent in this country. Not to the extent it is now, right now, own time period right now, but so the Klan was having some kind of resurgence. The Reverend Sun Myung Moon was in. So like one of the other groups, I couldn't use the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, obviously. They could sue, but I could do a group that was kind of like theirs and look at the different extremist positions that were assaulting America in many ways, and various ethnic groups of people or people with different sexual persuasions. And I thought this is something worth writing about. And then it was just coming up with a storyline that would be strong enough to bring him back and bring him, into the States with Monica.
Now, I had heard that there had been some pressure put on you to have some white characters, and that was one of the motivations. And then they were surprised when the white characters were mainly Klan members. Is that a true story?
Yeah, it's a true story. In the beginning, when I was doing Panther's Rage, thank God for the readers and the fans, because they were very supportive of the books. But in the hallowed halls of Marvel Comics and in editorial, not so much. I can think of 3 people that actually really like those books. And one of them is Jim Salicrup. He helped me get the books to read, to research the Panther. Dave Kraft and John David Warner. They're the only 3 I can think of that actually were positive about the books. So it was a precarious place to be. I think when they gave me the assignment, it was just the Black Panther in Wakanda. But I don't think editorial had thought it all the way through. What did that mean? Well, as I started to research the books and, okay, we're going to do that, that meant that all the characters had to be Wakandan, or essentially all the characters, because it's their mythology, not mine. And I debated this with them many times. You're the ones who said it's a hidden African nation. Nobody can find it. They got such technology that no one, except every once in a while, a white person can stumble in and find vibranium. Oh, we got to steal that vibranium. And so I thought, well, how many, I'm doing a regular series. And if every book you had white people just stumbling into the Wakanda, that seemed was going to wear thin very quickly. And I also thought, T'Challa needs a villain. That's just his. And then I felt it had to be connected, because if you're doing a bi-monthly book and in the beginning, we only had 13 pages. Well, every storyline, a villain comes up and, threatens Wakanda somehow, and the Panther has to fight them. After about 3 stories or so, I would think most of the readers are going, and most of the Wakandans would be going, hey, T'Challa, things were a lot better when you were back in America. Go back. We don't need you. There's a threat every 2 months. So then I thought it's got to be connected. And that's how the idea of doing it as a novel. And I thought they would all, if I stayed with it, they would all be novels. So you'd have one in Wakanda, and then you'd have one, like I was going to do South Africa, and then I would bring them back to Wakanda, and then I would take them. So the stories would have a variety to them, and you had places to go with the characters. So when the book started appearing and all the characters were Wakandan, I think editorial was prepared in 1973 for a book that had essentially an all-black cast of characters. And much of what's in the film that so many people praise and like, were set in those early stories. I mean, I wanted to create Wakanda as a separate, special place. I would talk to Glynis Oliver about the coloring and say, like Glynis, like the moon, it's never just pale yellow in Wakanda. There's always clouds scudding through it. It's always a frank Fazetta moon. It may be orange, it may be blood red. I just wanted to create the ambience of this place like you can't see it any other place unless you come to the series, and that Wakanda is its own environment. And every time you pick up a book, you're thrust into that society and those characters. But editorial was not used to having an all-black cast of characters. And they wanted to bring the Avengers in. And the more I met with people of all races and sexual persuasions, I realized it was important to keep it just the Panther. I didn't want the white guys having to come in and save the Black Panther. He can handle things very much on his own. May cost him a lot, but he's going to persevere, and he's going to do it. And so, I just stood fast on that. And then when I started to do the Klan stuff, and right away there was immediate reactions, within the offices. And I remember, I don't, one of those meetings in the editor's office, and they were, not crazy about the Klan stuff. And I said, for the past 2 years, you people have been bugging me for white people. Give me white people. I want white people. I give you white people. And there's just no pleasing you folks. And that's...
I mean, you shove those white people up their butts is what happened.
Yeah, kind of.
Do you think that had anything to do with the book being canceled? that you were doing the Klan storyline?
I'm sure that's something to do with me being canceled from the book, because it was very difficult. These days they would probably promote the book along those angles, but back then, no. I mean, it was it was the lowest selling book. It was never, when I was originally assigned the books, and I found out later after all of this that they thought Jungle Action and the Killraven stuff were going to die. And they didn't mind me being on editorial. I think it's because I had no political ambitions. If I wanted to try to become, editor in chief, I was going about it in the strangest way possible. And to be honest with you, I never wanted to edit. I just wanted to tell stories. So, but I knew by being on staff, it let me I could protect the books as much as I could because I was right there. And if things were going to be changed, I would have a chance to try to defend them.
Do you want to talk any about the ending of the Klan and how it was, you didn't get to finish the story?
No. Jim Shooter somehow was aware this conversation took place before. He was editor, so I don't know how he knew this, but because he's commented upon it. But when I was let go, I was told I was too close to the Black experience, and I held up my right hands, like, well, wait a minute, what are we talking about here? And Jim Shooter says that was just a gentle way of letting me down, and here's all I know. That's what I was told, and I was off the book. And economically, things were getting very, very tight and severe, and it meant I wasn't doing the book anymore.
But who was editor in chief at that moment? It was. Was it Marv Wolfman or Archie or something? Archie Goodwin or something?
Archie's one of the great guys in the business.
Right. Just as far as timeline, like who was editor-in-chief at that moment?
In fact, Archie is the one who got me to come back to Marvel Comics after I was told that I would never be allowed back into the offices of Marvel about 2 or 3 weeks before my son was born.
Why don't we move to the Killraven stuff, because we haven't talked about that except for one key aspect, which was the kiss, the interracial kiss. Right. That we talked about in the last episode. But I want to talk about more than that. I want to talk about primarily, I know you worked with some other artists on that series, including, I think, maybe your first work with Gene Colan. I'm not sure. But I want to talk mainly about one of the two artists that I associate with you the most, and that would be P. Craig Russell, because it's just I'd never seen anything more poetic than what you guys were doing at that time visually. What was that like? What was that collaboration like? Talk about that series a little bit with us.
First of all, I got incredibly fortunate. I mentioned earlier that when I was assigned these books, editorial really thought these books were going to die. They were bi-monthly books. Jungle genre material was not really selling in comics. I think Joe Kubert had been doing Tarzan, and DC didn't have good luck with that. If you can't sell Tarzan in that genre, well, how would another hero in that kind of situation sell? I think they had high hopes for War of the Worlds in the end, in the beginning, but what happened was it went through 3 different artists, I believe, 3 different writers. And so, when a book has, just in its first 3 issues, that many diverse talents in it, I think the hopes they had with it from the first issue were now dashed. And they just, again, science fiction was not a genre at that time that people felt had much of a chance. And that's how Craig Russell got involved with the project. And I got really, really fortunate. I had Rich Buckler and Billy Graham on the Black Panther, and they really cared about what they were doing. We were all very, very close. We were together and or on the phone all the time about these books. So they were virtually left alone. If I had been doing Spider-Man at the time, for instance, I would never have been allowed to do those stories. So when it came to Craig and Killraven, Craig had done an interview somewhere in a fanzine. The fanzine market was really just starting to have more titles, existing, but it was still fairly small. Unlike today with social media, where the comics are all over the place, being written about and analyzed, just like you guys are doing. But there wasn't a lot of that. The Comics Journal existed. I know Dean Mullaney did one, and so did Frank LaVecchia. And there were other small imprints. Apparently, Craig did an interview on a book that he had worked on for Marvel Comics. And in it, he complained about what they did to his art. I don't remember the details or anything like that. I didn't know Craig at the time. But how Craig got onto that book was Craig was in the doghouse with them. And he's not yet the Craig Russell that within a year he's, going to become. The reason that he got Killraven was they needed artists. More books were being done. And, we went from Gene, who did one of them. And I think I see in one of the letters columns that I guess Gene was going to maybe do others. I don't really know what happened there, because people do think that I chose Billy Graham for the Black Panther. Well, no, I didn't have that power in those days. I couldn't choose an artist. The same thing with Killraven. They put Gene and then they put Craig. Craig and I hit it off right away. I mean, and he wanted to do the best work he was capable of doing. He knew I wanted to do the best work that I was capable of doing at the time. And so it was it was terrific. And Craig just kept getting better every single issue, so that not 4 issues into Killraven, other writers are going to Craig saying, hey, why are you staying on that rinky-dink book of McGregor's? I could get you, 5 times the audience that book gets, and come work with me. And thank God for Craig. Craig just said, I'm perfectly fine where I am. And, he stayed with it right to the end. And it was just, those are beautiful looking books.
Did you guys chat about potential layout ideas together?
I did a lot of layouts on the Black Panther. I did not do a lot of layouts. Sometimes I would have suggestions of how I wanted a scene to go. But if Craig came up with something better, that was fine. It's like when you work with an artist over a period of time, you find what ways work best for you together. And so Billy would be totally separate on what worked for him, and it would be for Craig and what worked for Craig. And I just was very fortunate to have these really, really talented people. Now, when in between that, after Killraven and after the Black Panther, and I'm going to try to read that section later, but when I was told not to come back to Marvel Comics again, later on, I was at, I think Forbidden Planet was doing some kind of function. And I didn't normally go to a lot of those. I'm not sure why I went that particular night, but it was filled with comics people. And, like so many of talent, artists and writers, colorists, letterers, et cetera, they were all in New York in those days. So anyhow, I'm at this store at this, Phil Sully must have been putting it on, but I don't remember exactly what it was about. Anyhow, Archie Goodwin came up to me and said, Don, would you come back to do Killraven? And I said, well, I wouldn't be interested unless, Craig were drawing it. And Archie tells me, yeah, Craig's interested in drawing it. And I said, well, because Jim Shooter was still head of that place. And I said, well, who am I answerable to, you or Jim Shooter? And Archie said, you only have to deal with me. I said, well, then if Craig is going to do it and you're going to be the editor, I'm in. I'm ready to do it. Understand, I can't end everything in one graphic novel, but I can satisfy the story situations that have been set up with his brother, and I could bring that all together. The other stuff was way too big and for me to do all in one 48-page story. And Archie was in agreement with that. He kept his word to me on everything. There were some mistakes made in that book, and I had corrected them and brought them in for corrections. And Archie wasn't in the day I left them off. Well, somehow those corrections never got made. But Archie did call me in when the black lines came in, and I caught them. I said, Archie, I spent all this time. I corrected this material, and none of it's been done. And Archie investigated the situation, said, Don, you're absolutely right. It's our mistake, not yours. And he went to the printers and told them to redo, that these corrections had to be made, because they were, like, especially the fans of Killraven, there were a couple that certainly were at odds with the timeline that had been, that I had done about those characters. So Archie was just great. I can't say enough positive things. Archie was my first editor at Warren magazines. And, the first story I ever did, Archie edited. And Tom Sutton drew it. I didn't even know it was being done. And it comes in as everything I asked for. If I wanted reverse angle shots, continuity shots, point of view shots, whatever it was, Tom Sutton could do it and more. And I thought it was going to be that way all the time, wow. And then I got to Marvel and things were a lot different.
When I look up your output at Marvel, it seems to be kind of less towards 76, 77. What was the amazing reason for that? Because Jim Shooter became editor-in-chief in 78. So what was your impression of what was happening in 76 and 77 that led to have less writing output at Marvel?
I don't know the answer directly to that. I mean, after I was let go on the books, I know John David Warner gave me some work. And there was a lot of editors were shifting all the time. And like one editor would tell you something, if there's a new person coming in, they would tell you something else. And like, oh, that editor's not going to use your work. And there was just a lot of unsettling events happening that I wouldn't have access to. I was not part of, and I quit the editorial job, mostly in hopes of like keeping my marriage together, which didn't work. And so I was alone out there at the time. And I had started, because I'd met a lot of fans and now there was a lot of talk. And I started working on Sabre. I didn't realize that Sabre was going to end up being just as explosive because of the race situation, because it dealt with race. And then later on, it was going to have gay characters in it. Let's just say there were a lot of people that wasn't very acceptable in comics in those days. And so I was doing a lot of work there and I was, trying to survive, but things were really pretty tight money-wise. And so
Alex is mentioning your slowdown in 76. I would point out that you were on Power Man at that point. Right. Issues 30 through 35, you'd also done 28. So you were working in 76. And I wondered what you thought about going from Black Panther to Power Man. Did they give you that book because you were the black guy? I mean, because you were the black experience person? Or what?
That's before that line gets said. It's the only time I ever asked for a title. I'm not sure what the background is, but Luke Cage was open, like whoever had been writing it wasn't going to write it anymore. They needed a writer. And it didn't really have anything to do with Luke Cage being black, even though I spent a lot of time up in Harlem and Spanish Harlem. So I knew of the writers that were living in New York City. I could write about those places intimately because I stayed there many times with Billy Graham or with Alex Simmons. So I had a lot of experience with that, but what I really wanted to do was write a book about New York City. I loved being in New York City, and Cage was a street level Manhattan based series. So that I really like, and it is well, and I wasn't taking anything away from another writer, because there's a lot of stuff that was very dismaying to me that writers would do to one another. I didn't see artists do that much. Artists seem to encourage each other. A lot of writers didn't. And Larry Hama recently, in the past couple of years, mentioned that to me about writers. And I got to say, Larry, from my experience, is pretty accurate. So I wanted to do Luke Cage because I wanted to write about New York City. And this book gave me the chance to do that. And you can see it right from the first page. It's all about, being on 42nd Street at 2 a.m.
Yeah, you really made the locale into almost a character in the book. Another character that was in the book, which I found really interesting, was this is where Quentin Chase comes into play. And he had a wife and a daughter, but they were going through some weird friction at home. And I wondered if this was in any way reflecting what was going on in your own life at the time.
Yeah, probably. But all the books, you invest a lot of yourself in them. Sometimes things that readers think, oh, well, that's Don writing about something in his own life. Sometimes it's got nothing to do with it. Other times, stuff that actually does, people aren't aware of it. It really just depends. But yeah, I'm sure that had probably some kind of an influence on it. I can't swear because like a lot of 1976 to 1978, it was such an emotional time. It's like kind of going, into the abyss. And if you get lucky, you come out on the other side. But everything's gray in there. I'm sure people like Dave Kraft and Jim Salicrup, Steve Gerber, those people would probably remember much more about this. Alex Simmons, Billy Graham, Craig, they would be much more aware of some of the stuff that happened, probably because it was so painful. A lot of it, I just don't remember, like getting on the other side of it. And once I was with Marsha, it was a different story entirely. So let me read you this little Christmas story about, this goes in between right after I've been taken off most of the books. I remember a Christmas season while I was still writing Dragonflame. The money situation was desperate, to put it mildly. I was with my daughter, Lauren, on one of our court-appointed weekends, and we walked past holiday hawkers on the Greenwich Village street corners, shouting about their wares, Christmas trees, imported from upstate New York. Get yourself your own Christmas tree right here. We got the best Christmas trees there is. A man in a raggedy blue sweater shouted at us. There were broken pine branches scattered over the broken gray slabs of sidewalk. I stopped walking, feeling Lauren's hand in mine, remembering a jumble of my own childhood Christmases. I had $20 to my name, $20 that had to last through the week, or maybe more. But Lauren would only be 5 years old once. And I very fiercely wanted her to have a Christmas tree at her dad's house. Intermingled with those emotions was a sense of failure. I had the impulse to run back to the comic book offices and tell them I would write anything they wanted not me to write, just so that I could easily afford a Christmas tree for this 5-year-old girl who held my hand and heart, and also so that I would not have to face such guilt and failure. The man in the raggedy sweater squinted at me through the darkness. You want one, he asked, shaking one of the trees, a puny thing with scrawny branches. More twigs dropped onto the cement. Lauren stooped and picked up a couple of greens, fingering the pine needles, her dark, wondrous eyes seeing shapes and visions I could not. She did not know that her father felt like a loser on this cold night. $20 in my pocket, I thought, but what the hell? I can survive on $10 for the week, maybe even $5 if I have to. It'll be a tight week, eating Campbell's soup every day, but I can hack that. You want to get a tree, Harry? I called Lauren that after Harry Houdini. I also called her Cutiekins, which I think she still likes to this day, and sometimes Wolfgang because she liked Mozart. Can we, she asked? Well, sure, but we have to pick it out, We'll have to look them over, I said as the hawker scowled at me in the dark and shouted to other passersby. I wondered if he also sensed that I was a loser. Holding onto her branches close to her chest, Lauren looked at the branches leaning against the battered station wagon, which seemed to match the raggedy sweater and the 3 days' growth of beard. How much are your cheapest trees? I asked, trying to be casual. $20. Excuse me? $20, he returned, louder, his eyes already dismissing me. I felt as if I'd been shot. I knew I was taking this too hard, making too big a deal of it, yet depression hooked claws into my mind and unlocked vast doors of self-pity. I walked over to Lauren, who was judging those Christmas trees with dark eyes. I knelt before her, feeling very sad, as if not only her dreams, but my own were endangered. Honey, I said, finding it hard to speak. Yes, Dad, she asked, turning to me. I looked into those deep, dark brown eyes of 5 years, and I said quietly, honey, Daddy doesn't have enough money to get a Christmas tree. See, they're a lot of money. They're more than I thought. And, well, Dad just doesn't have enough. She smiled at me as if I was being much too silly. That's okay, Dad, she said, buoyantly. Not to worry. And then she held out the 2 branches she had clutched to her chest. See, I still got my branches, and that'll be enough. It was a Christmas story in some children's book about the meaning of Christmas with cute illustrations, except that it wasn't. It was Greenwich Village with shouts and curses and car horns and grocery stores going dark for the night. And there were no illustrations. There was only this dear daughter of mine whose words brought tears to my eyes that I could not explain. Tears that were a mixture of love and hurt and hope. I could not hold her close enough. She was 5 years old. She could not understand her father's tears, I'm sure, but she held me also, tiny arms stretched up around my neck innocently, with a love I felt I did not deserve. I did not want to lose ever. I write about it now so that I won't forget that time, and so that sometime she too may read about it. I wonder how she will remember that night, if she recalls anything of it at all.
That's a tearjerker. That's very emotional and heartfelt.
Yeah.
Somebody said to me, one person who's read that piece said, Don, if everything you wrote was that good, you wouldn't be a bad writer. So what do I know?
You're a great writer, Don. All right, Jim.
Were you going through, were you done with custody when you were writing that?
That was still being fought. When I wrote that, I was getting to see Lorne on weekends. It's too complex to go into. And on top of that, you guys are probably aware that in that time frame, there was a lot of original artwork missing from Marvel Comics. I'm not going to go into any more detail than this, except that I couldn't believe that my divorce had at its roots, I would see much of the original artwork that was going to vanish because lawyers and other people were going to take it away into the night. And I didn't even know I was going to see it. I would not be able to prove it, but that stolen artwork was hooked into, in a tangential way, my divorce. So it was a very traumatic time, truly.
I could get lost in just asking you divorce questions because I don't know if you know, I'm a divorce lawyer by profession, but I'm going to resist that and talk about what I think we can do to move ahead is kind of a little lightning round. I'm going to name some things and give me some a little background, just a short thing on that. The first one I wanted to ask you about was
you didn't know that, Jim. I don't really do short. Never mind. Probably it's because I'm 5'4" tall. I don't think I do short. Never mind.
Totally up to you. Maybe these things don't warrant a long story, though. 1975, the radio drama series Night Figure that was going to run on WHBI FM. Can you talk about that for a minute or for however long you want?
Obviously, you realize I love all mediums, pop culture, so old radio shows. I loved old radio shows. And once I got together with Alex Simmons, Alex is multi-talented. One of the things he does is act, and we both loved old radio. So I had created a character called Night Figure, and Alex could do about 6 to 8 voices. I was capable of maybe 2, but I could scream really well, whatever the screams were needed. I think we did like a 10-minute sequence of a guy being eaten alive by rats. But we had a lot of fun doing it. It was I really like doing it. And I love and Misty Carlton Morse's, I think probably the best horror mystery radio series ever.
So did this ever air?
Yeah.
Oh, for how long?
Just on Halloween night.
Oh, I see. So it was it was not a series. It was just going to be a one.
Very often, everything I do, Jim, is I get storylines done. Wait a minute. I may only have a sentence or 2, but I kind of know storylines. Oh, I'm going to go to that. I want to write about that. Or if I have a title that really entices me, that'll be, and I know it the title is indicative of what that story is going to be about. In fact, I have a list of probably 100 titles that if I went to that page on the computer, I could just see all those titles. And if I saw one, that still sounds pretty good, then probably I would do it. But I was playing around with film at the same time. So I was doing all these things while doing the comics.
Is this preserved somehow? Is there a way for anyone to listen to this?
The Super 8 stuff in the 8mm, yes, I still have it, but you can't view it. You could never do this these days. I mean, Alex Simmons and I used to go into Central Park and strap 6 guns, around our waist and go hunt each other down in Central Park at 3:00 in the morning. I was talking with Alex about this recently, and he said, these days, Don, I'd probably get shot. And unfortunately, he's not far wrong. It's just, we've had so many terrible incidents of Black people being killed. So, but in those days, we were having a great time. And then we used to film. Alex and then another friend of mine who just died recently worked at CBS. So on the weekends, we would actually film fight scenes. We were filming a film and doing big fight scene. We're in the offices where they do the research for 60 minutes. And because both Alex and I like doing our own stunts. And, again, it's just trying to make what you see in pop culture a little more real, and having fun playing that kind of a thing.
All right, let me ask you the next one I had. Marvel around 77, they were doing Marvel Classics comics, sort of their view on Classic Illustrated. And right. you did a Edgar Allan Poe book with Michael Golden. I think it was his first penciled published work. Do you recall that?
I recall the book, but I really don't recall the Michael Golden part of it. The parts that I really remember are the Pit and the Pendulum, because I think every line from Poe's short story is in that adaptation. And I had come up with a visual way to use comics for it. I started, I think, with 12 panel pages, then went to 10 panel or 9 panel pages to 6 panel pages till when the rats are swarming over them and the pendulum is slicing them open. Those are full page shots. And then I would reverse it as we went to the end of the story and the other way, making the panels smaller and smaller. So that was it was an interesting visual way to do Pit and the Pendulum. And then with Telltale Heart, I wish it had better lettering, but the idea was to have that sound effect of the heartbeat get larger and larger until the panels where the murder actually occurs are within panels that are actually the shape of the heartbeat.
So those two I remember. You did several of these then. And were they mainly the Poe adaptations? That
particular book had, because they were short stories, they had 3. There's a Pit and the Pendulum. They had the Telltale Heart, and then what Michael Golden did.
Yeah.
I had outside, I designed a lot of the pages for those first 2 stories, but I had no contact with Michael Golden. Okay. I know his name, and I know that Renee Widerstatter I think she represents Michael. But outside of that, I don't really know much more.
Okay.
The adaptation of Wilkie Collins' Moonstone, which was like a 600-page novel. I pulled out every visual trick in the book, but every scene and structurally, every scene in that book is in that comic. And I'm still proud of that one. I really worked hard at these to make them, and there's very little, seldom maybe a bridging line or two that's Don McGregor. The other, if it's H.G. Wells, if it's Poe, if it's Wilkie Collins, whoever it is, it's their writing, not mine.
I have that Moonstone book, the Marvel version, and I've read the novel. Right. I will look at that tonight because I can't believe you got everything in there. That's amazing.
Everything.
All right, so let's talk about the black and white magazines. Just briefly on. Oh, there I go again. But on Morbius was a character that you did write there, and then I want to take that from that to the Hodiah Twist issue with Rick Marshall. That issue and get your version of those events. But let's talk with Morbius first.
Jim, how many stories do you want about what went on behind the scenes with Morbius?
2.
Because there's a lot of great stories, but, let me see.
The 2 best ones, please.
The first thing, let me say, The Lighthouse of the Possessed and the sequel to that, Tom Sutton drew the first one and Rich drew the second. That story was originally a Vampirella story.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. See, there's a lot of stories. Well, like when the police come to my apartment while I'm writing one of the Morbius stories. But see, there's many stories behind the scenes on these. So anyhow, when I was doing this stuff when Archie was going to leave Vampirella. They chose me to do the Vampirella series. And it's the only time I clipped went through all the vampy stuff, clipped many of the key panels where Archie was doing like the history, so I wouldn't violate whatever Archie had set up. And I had done that story, Lighthouse of the Possessed, for Warren as a Vampirella story. And the editor at the time said I had a political slogan in there, no chicanery with mannery. And so the editor goes, oh, you can't use the word chicanery because none of the readers will understand that word. So when I wrote the script, I actually didn't use it in the caption. I didn't use it in the dialogue, but in the script, I had vampy and instead of like Amanda Saint, I believe I had a male character bouncing off the stuff between Vampy and that character. And they're walking through the Foxtrot at night, and on the wall, I had said, there's a poster, no chicanery with mannery. I didn't know whether Tom would include it or maybe a portion of it might, because the characters could be in front of it. The editor was so incensed that I used the word chicanery that he said, you can't do the book. So when the opportunity came to do Morbius, well, that's too good a story to throw away. I just took Morbius and transformed Vampirella, and the Vampirella character becomes Morbius. And the male character that was with Vampy now becomes Amanda Saint, which apparently they're doing in some books that are being done today, or maybe even some film adaptation. I'm not sure, but so that's how that originally came about. And so if you read that story, just try to picture it because virtually nothing's been changed except the personalities. When Morbius is talking, obviously he's reflecting, Michael Morbius, but scene for scene, it's exactly the same story. You didn't know that, did you?
No, I didn't. And I've read an awful lot of your interviews. I had not seen that. That is new information for me. So I'm glad you gave it to us. Should we talk about Hodiah Twist?
When we interviewed Rick, we asked him, because there's this whole thing of his author credit went on your story, and we asked him how that happened. He claims it was an accident, and he's sorry. Can you tell us what happened?
Absolutely can tell you what happened. And in fact, the other section that I was going to read to you is about the work for hire contracts, because that is all around the work for hire contracts. This piece is a little bit longer, but it's all about the Hodiah Twist stuff. The system as it existed in comics, whether you're at DC or whether you're at Marvel, that's the way it was. I finished the Hodiah Twist story in March. The Quentin Chase plot synopsis had not yet found an artist. They were having trouble getting Marshall Rogers to do it, and were considering other possibilities. Gene Colan was illustrating the Hodiah Twist story with all those beautifully penciled faces shaded as if they had been painted rather than drawn. And I just want to make a comment here. Gene so loved that story that for years afterwards, when I was with Gene, and going right up to, I was with Gene the day before he died at the hospice, and sitting on his bed, like he was holding my hand. And I had brought at one point the Killraven, Something Worth Dying For, that Gene drew, to him, because Gene was the first one to draw the serpents dying. And Gene would always say, oh, no, Don, the first story we ever did was Hodiah Twist. I said, no, it wasn't, Gene. You did a Killraven. What's a Killraven? And even when I brought him the comic, when I showed it to him, he said, yeah, but the first story we did now was Hodiah Twist. And so he loved that story. And Adrian, his wife, had told me, he said, Gene never reads ahead. This is going to sound, it was astounding to me when I read this, because Gene was so powerful as an artist. It was like, is there anything he can't draw? You can't ask of him to do? And so Adrian said he's continually surprised by the story. He'll come to me and say, and he never does this, look what happens next. And I said, what do you mean you didn't know what was going to happen, Gene? He said, I never look ahead. I can only draw the page that's right in front of me. He said, because if I look ahead, I start worrying about how am I going to draw that. So I I have to draw the page that's in front of me and then go on to the next one. And then I realized, well, Gene sometimes he'd like a scene so much that he would extend it. And but with Nathaniel Dusk, I would be able to say to Gene, hey, Gene, if you're not up with me now, you need to catch up here because we got a big ending coming. And so that, he just understood the characters in my head. Like so many Gene Colan stories that I could tell you, but just like he had done the Hodiah twist story. And I loved that. I think Tony DeZuniga inked it. But that story was written while the old work for hire contracts were still being enforced. Because what I'm talking about here, that's in March, I'm going to go be, by July, I'm going to be guest of honor over in England for the big London comic convention. And I took Marsha with me, and Marsha was 7 months pregnant, I guess, at the time with Rob. And there's a whole bunch of adventures there where they actually took us off the plane, weren't going to let us come back to the States. And it became the comic convention people actually had to go to the media and threaten the airline company going that they were holding an American comic book writer hostage and not letting him go back home to the States. But there's a lot of stories there, but they take way too long to tell all of them. Anyhow, let me see if I can. Marshall Rogers agreed to do the project and asked that I write a complete script as I had with Hodiah twist. I was committed. Detectives Incorporated was finally going to be done. And now I had to make good on all those things I had told myself over the years that it could be. Obviously, I couldn't do it all in one book, but that first story had to say quite clearly that comics can do anything a writer and artist want. Comics do not have to have a strict uniform structure. Comics can deal with sensitive subjects and not merely pretend they are addressing them. They can be about human beings, not only superheroes or caricatures. Already I knew that I would take those vague ideas I had back on that Long Island beach in some long ago alien time of vast despair, and I would review them and then begin work with fear and tension, with love and excitement. Fear, you ask? Tension? But why? Because it was 11 years later, and here was my chance to finally bring Denning and Rainier to life. And all the visions of the past decade refused to be tamed. I felt inadequate to the task. Which sequences would I have to reject to accompany the logistics of the project? Which segments of their lives should I show in the book? As I began working on Detectives Incorporated, I received a phone call from an editor at Marvel Comics. We have a problem, he said, that August afternoon. So I've just come back from London and Switzerland. And I had really promoted the book while I was over there because I had seen, Gene's illustrations of it. This story was well done back in March while the work for hire contract was still in force. So they owned it. There was no, it wasn't like I could, say, claim a copyright to it. They had that story, but they were trying to force everybody to sign work for hire. We have a problem, he said that August afternoon. I asked, bemused, my head still filled with conversations between Rainier and Denning, but I was trying to concentrate on this business world, suddenly brought colliding into the creative world by the ringing phone. Yes, said the editor, we. It's about that Hodiah twist story you wrote some time back. I know the story, I answered. It took me 3 months to write. At the time, you said it was the most beautiful story you'd bought, remember? You mean that story? The one Gene Colan illustrated, and that I placed the dialogue balloons on the artwork, a long time back? Yes, that story. Well, what kind of problem could we have? It wasn't really a question I wanted to ask. It's about the contract, the editor explained. The contract, the Marvel Comics contract, the contract that must, as of July 1978, be signed by every writer and artist who wishes to work for the company. The contract that states in no uncertain terms that you are not a writer, but supplier of works for hire, and that, as such, you have no claim to any further residuals or fees that might accrue from the story you have written, be it merchandising or movie deals or television series or whatever. There was a very definite reason for such a new contract, several definite reasons, in fact. New copyright laws had come into effect in January 1978. There were laws set up to legally protect writers in any medium, and they did not exclude the comics industry. Photographers, artists, all were protected under these new laws, and the major comics companies were well aware of that fact, especially with the multi-million-dollar movie deals a la Superman in the works, and with television begging for more of the Hulk and Spider-Man, and with merchandising of Wonder Woman dolls and Captain America motorcycles and other such stimulating toys at all the same time high. It was big money time, folks, and no one on the corporate level wanted to make any mistakes or let any of that moolah fall into other hands besides their own. They could have done the decent thing for once in this industry, but no, they wanted it all as usual. They could not arrange a contract whereby the creative people might see 5 or 10% of any sale that was directly a result of the product of those creative people. The company could still have seen most of the added income in their coffers, but no, we're talking big money here, and they wanted it all. The corporate decision makers sent their publishers and editors out to do their dirty work. The same people who had once written stories themselves, but these folks had to do their duty. And with glee, it would almost seem. They were only doing their duty as Marvel's representatives. In July 1978, Marvel presented their work for hire contracts. Every writer and artist was asked to sign that paper. The editors did not speak of coercion. However, if a particular person refused to sign that contract, he would no longer receive freelance work from the company. And once the major comic book writers and artists signed that contract, the people who were holding out and protesting it were doomed. As it now stands, anyone who wants to sign that contract, it is as simple as that. Be an artist or writer must sign that contract. The publishers and editors gave them a chance to legitimately lay down the law to certain artists and writers whom they felt weren't always obliging. There were many who fought it. There were many who refused to sign, who realized what it meant to the industry, an industry they loved. In July, I had been presented with the contract. I'd read through it painfully. If I wanted to write more stories for Marvel, I would have to sign it. I understand, though I have not seen them personally, that similar contracts were simultaneously being presented at the other major comics companies. I cannot comment on those because I did not see them. I do not mean to single Marvel Comics out on this call. I recount the events with Marvel because it was there that I had my personal experience. I know tales of many other people who were presented with the same decision as to whether or not they would sign that work for hire contract. But those are their stories, not mine. I know of others only as hearsay. I write these lines so that you, who might want to enter this field, who may have a love for comics that cannot be denied, will understand the situation. I do not mean to imply at any time that I was the only one who underwent those painful decisions. I wasn't. I do mean to imply that Don McGregor was singled out as an example. I wasn't no more than any of the others who refused to sign. It didn't matter who you were. It was only the decision that mattered. In July 1978, I looked at that contract. Marsha was pregnant. The baby was due in September. If I could not write any stories at all for Marvel, it meant that the future looked dismal. I did not have only myself to consider anymore. I talked it over with Marsha, torn and anguished. I still remember the Christmas when I could not buy a Christmas tree. Marsha is one of a kind lady. I had told her if I sign that contract, I'll feel like a hypocrite. I'm not sure I would be able to believe in anything anymore, knowing that I would turn my back on it when it became inconvenient. I could not expect anyone else to believe in what I said either if I did that. But is that reason enough to put you through what could be hell? I don't want you to sign it, Marsha had said, but I don't want you to do something you don't believe in. We'll make it through somehow. I don't want you to sign this and have it tear you up. I love that woman. We'll take the risk together, she had said. She was as scared as I was. Politely, I'm sure I said it politely, since I did not want to burn any bridges behind me, and there was still a part of me that wanted this of the early 60s. Politely, I told the editor then that I could not sign the contract, but that I hoped one day they would have a magazine that would not come into the jurisdiction of the contract. Perhaps then we could work together again. There is a part of me, a foolish part perhaps, that is rooted back in nostalgically innocent beliefs that would still like to have parted with equal respect. Now in August 1978, I was going to have to make this decision again. We can't publish the Hodiah twist story unless you sign the contract, I was told. But why, I asked. I wonder if it sounded like a whine. It sounded like a whine to me. I did not want to sound that way. I wanted to sound self-assured, confident, virile, all those positive traits we wish for. I wrote that story back in March of this year. Marvel Comics brought the story back then. You have a little statement on the back of the check that says you own the material. It has already been drawn by Gene Colan. He has been paid for it. I assume the story is now being inked by Tony DeZuniga. Therefore, what's the hassle? The editor informs me that he has fought for the Hodiah twist story. I must believe him, he says. He still loves the story, but they will not print it. Not a chance unless I sign the contract. He only has the story at heart. He sounds sincere. Then I am informed that he has high hopes for the Hodiah twist story. If it does well in this one-shot story, perhaps we could do it as a series. He is going to try to convince Mike Kaluta to be a cover for the issue. I have suspicions. I do not think they have anything to do with paranoia, since I do not believe there is anything personal in the events. If anything, they are impersonal. The human being is forfeited. It has little to do with any writer or artist, except for the position they have taken at the time. This is a business. It is not for children. You play by our rules or you don't play. You keep your mouth shut or we'll remember. I want to believe the editor's apparent sincerity. I want to bask in the praise, but too often in the past have I seen the creator's ego massaged to soothe them into doing what the company wants done. Most of all, I wanted the story to reach its audience. There's more. It's going to go into the editor-in-chief coming in and telling me he won't let Don McGregor make a liar out of him to John Buscema. And I'm going in my head like, what's he talking about? John Buscema, what's John Buscema got to do with this? And it was something that I told John Buscema that there would be no special deals for anybody, and certainly not Don McGregor. And I wasn't asking, for any particular, give me something no one else has had. And in fact, then the editor at one point earlier has suggested, well, you go to the fanzines and complain, but sign the paper anyhow. And I just felt at the time, if I signed it, it was like you're condoning and endorsing it. So did that work? Reading that segment, did that work for you guys?
Yes, Don, absolutely. But I have a follow-up question, which is, sure. Are you relating that to the Rick Marshall credit in the magazine that you were left off as the author?
One of the upshots of that was that at a New York convention, and I don't know why these people think they can get away with this kind of thing, it was told that I did not write that script. I can show you the script right now, Jim. Well, I don't know if I can get my hands on it because we've had to repaint all the ceilings, and I'm not sure where everything is right now. But when I was in Brooklyn, I could put my hands right on it. That details everything about that time period and those particular books. So, yes, they went to a convention. They thought they're on a panel, apparently, and somebody asked the question you're asking, and Rick Marshall apparently says that he wrote it. And a credit comes on when the book comes out, and I got a lawyer at the time, but I couldn't afford to pursue it. If Steve Gerber couldn't get it for Howard the Duck, what was I going to be able to do with the Hodiah twist story? And it had already seen print. They'd already taken my name off it. But I'm sure the editor was pressured by the editor-in-chief to McGregor's name doesn't go on that story. Print it, but his name doesn't go on it. And it's all me.
So to be totally clear, it was a deliberate act for these purposes that you described, and not an accident in any way. You know what, Jim? You assess it. Okay. I wasn't even there when, I don't know why they thought because obviously as soon as it was done, people are calling me to tell me, hey, look, this is what was said today. This is what was done. Accident? I don't think so. But today, everyone acknowledges that there's no dispute any longer. That's clearly your story, your creation and everything, correct? You'd have to ask other people. I can't answer that. I created another Holmesian type character, Alexander Risk, and my hope is still, because it's entirely written, at one point,
Tom Sutton was supposed to draw it. And Tom actually did 20 pages of it, and it saw print in a thing called Fantasy Illustrated. And I had written the next 20-some pages, and Tom had done those. And then that magazine folded. But later on, when I was back working at Marvel, when I came back to do Panther's Quest and Panther's Prey, and then did the Spider-Man stuff, Marvel was going to go back to doing creator-owned material. And so that thing was voted on by committee, I think 3 times, and it was that they were going to print it. And then Marvel decided to go against the creator-owned stuff. So the Alexander Riss stuff, the Hounds of Hell theory, which is 2 of the major differences with that character and Hodiah Twist is one, it's kind of a combination of the Thin Man and Sherlock Holmes. So it's about a married couple. And so the dynamics and the emotional complexity became something really interesting for me to write about. And later on, Mike Mayhew did some great illustrations on it. And then, and I was just recently did some really great drawings on it. Will it happen? I hope it's one of those things that get done before I die, along with young Sabre. And I hope there's some chance maybe that Lady Rawhide, Other People's Blood, can afford it to be done. You know, we'll have to just see. I don't know.
You're definitely skipping ahead to things we want to ask about, especially for me, Lady Rawhide. One last question, which is going to feed totally into Alex's whole series of questions, which is, when did you pitch Dagger to Marvel, and who turned it down? And then in that course, you're going to say what Dagger actually is.
Well, I don't know that I actually pitched it to Marvel. I knew there'd be too many problems doing it there. And I know I was working on it at Mad Genius, which was Steve Gerber, Dave Kraft, Jim Salicrup. And a lot of times I would go, Marius Greenis would have been there. Every once in a while, Janie Aarons. And so in that time frame, because Jim Salicrup was going to do, he wanted to do a newspaper that was on comics, and it would have it would come out regularly. I don't remember. Jim would have to tell you what exactly he wanted to do. Dagger was originally created to be like a strip running in that paper that Jim Salicrup wanted to put out. But it was too ambitious, so too much material that it had to be handled. And I just thought, that's not the right format for it. And then Dean Mullaney, who I met through the books. I met so many great people. The people who loved the books really loved the books. You know, the people in editorial who hated the books, like people seem to either really love these books or they really, really hated them. So I was at the apartment at my place with Dean, probably watching movies, because this is before VHS was around. And we spent hanging out that night. And the next day I got a call from Dean. And Dean says, "Hey, Don, can I publish Sabre?" And I'd already changed the name to Sabre. I know this is going to sound odd, but these characters become very real to you. And somehow the name Dagger just wasn't for him. He was Sabre. And so Dean said, "Well, can I publish Sabre?" Because I had the poster for the character. And I said, You don't publish comics. How are you going to do it, Dean?" Yeah, but I want to publish comics. And I said, "Well, you know, I want to own everything. You got it. I want to have final say on anything that's done with my copy. Nothing can be changed unless I change it. You got it." I had probably half a dozen things I said to Dean, and he said yes to all of them. And I said, "Well, I guess you better come over then." That's how Dean and I, you know, and however, the book, just free from the big companies, didn't mean that race things wouldn't still be a problem. And it took up for 2 years, and there was at some points, would it ever get finished? Meantime, I'm struggling to stay alive economically. So that happens during that time frame of the lawn and the Christmas tree stories. And I'm going to read, I have picked that out I've written about that sequence in a piece I did on the history of Detectives Incorporated. And I want to read that to you guys because it's going to answer your questions more solidly than I can just trying to remember it, because it was written in the time frame. And so much of the stuff can be, it's very accurate to what happened then. There were new editorial shakeups at Marvel in the beginning of 1978. And I went back to work on a couple of scripts for the company. One of them was a realistic police story featuring Quentin Chase. It was entitled A Touch of Euphoria, A Touch of Death. I had found after working on Sabre that interracial elements could still bring fire to the eyes of certain folks. Somehow fire and threats. I had thought it was the late 70s and we were past all that rabid miscegenation taboos. But I began to realize I was living in Manhattan and that the attitude I took for granted was anything but. One editor, upon seeing the story, quietly and sincerely asked me if I, quote, believed in this mixture stuff. It makes me sick to think of all those beautiful Nordic blonde women taking their blood. Think of all those races losing their ethnic purity. He wasn't joking. That's why I insisted that the married couple in A Touch of Euphoria, A Touch of Death, remain interracial, since that was a major reason I had wanted to write the story, to show we have not come as far as we may think, and that often we make innocent people pay a price in suffering that gets higher all the time. Marcia Rogers' name had been mentioned as an artist for the story, and I was ecstatic about that. It almost seemed too good to be true. I could not believe they would let me handle a story that touched on child pornography, interracial marriage, miscarriage, and drugs. Plus, they had given me the go-ahead to do a new Hodiah twist story, too. I wrote a full script for the hero killer principle, as opposed to the 34-page plot synopsis I had done for A Touch of Euphoria, A Touch of Death. The reason for this was so that I could be paid as I wrote the Hodiah twist story. I was going to get married to Marcia, so with my marriage upcoming, I was so desperate for cash that I sold in the plot to Quentin Chase piece for only $50. All of that work. Of course, it was understood I would script it as soon as they assigned an artist and the pencil pages came in, whenever that would be. Heaven didn't last long. Some editors aren't autonomous, and others have editors looking over at what they do. A Touch of Euphoria, A Touch of Death, which had been described by one editor as powerful, realistic stuff that's really going to work well, despite this interracial nonsense, came under another's eyes. Suddenly, they wanted me to cut pages out of the story. I said, no hard feelings now, but this is a story I really want to do, and I have put it precisely the way I want to present it. If it can't be done that way, let me buy it back for you guys at $50, and I'll do it somewhere else. I stayed to work on finding another publisher. I called Dean Mullaney of Eclipse Enterprises, and I said, I need $50 to buy this plot back, and then I would transform it into a Detectives Incorporated script. Is that okay, I asked? Go ahead, Dean said. And then I suggested that we get Marcia Rogers to do the book for Eclipse. I guess the editors at Marvel didn't think I would actually buy the story back just because I didn't agree with the changes. The editor in charge was friendly. Okay, the story will stay as it is. I'll even give you a few extra pages. Now, just out of curiosity, you were bluffing, weren't you? You didn't really have anybody to sell that story to, did you? I should have bought the story back when I had the chance, but I didn't. The idea, though, to do Detectives Incorporated was now in the back of my mind.
Now, Sabre is really important. You know, I wrote an article, which you've posted on your Facebook, about how it's really important in the sequence of important graphic novels in the history of the medium. People say Will Eisner's Contract with God is the first graphic novel, but Sabre comes out actually before that. How was the overall reception with readers? Did it do well in the direct market? And how did it do in general? And were you happy with it?
Yeah, I had a heart attack when I was 40, and Marcia felt it was Sabre that did it.
Oh, really?
Because I said something to her, this book is breaking my heart. And I wasn't thinking I would even be having a heart attack. It was just the things that would happen to that book. Where, like, say, Detectives Incorporated, even though it had the first gay characters, on for kind of mainstream comics. There was no problems with anybody working on the book. It was fine. Sabre, every book had stuff that happened to it, and outside of the writing of it. And so the first one, got held up for 2 years. I actually wrote that in probably the end of 76, going into 77.
Oh, wow.
But it took 2 years to draw those 38 pages.
Paul Gulacy does a beautiful job from what
Paul's a great artist. Unfortunately, he had a problem with the fact that Melissa was pregnant. Didn't want Melissa pregnant in the story.
Wow.
And in fact, I have a note on the calendar as late as May of the year it saw publication. He was talking about turning Sabre white. Now, he's not going to do that because 20-some pages or more of the book had already been done. No artist is going to throw away that kind of work and start from the beginning. No. And by the way, the book wouldn't have come out. Literally, we discussed it. I'm not changing it.
Uh-huh.
If I was going to change, I might as well stay at Marvel Comics and, do what they want. Why am I going to go out and try this? And in the beginning, when Dean and I first talked about it, the difference between Will's book, A Contract with God, and Sabre is that Sabre was going to be sold directly through the comic book market. Right. Now, a lot of people didn't believe the comic book market could support a book. In those days, the people in the suits thought it was between 10 to 15% of their audience, and it just couldn't, a book couldn't survive economically.
Right.
And when Phil Suling first saw the note from Dean that we were going to charge $6 for it. Now, remember, this is 77, 78. Dean, I think, still has Phil Suling's note. $6 for a comic with about 10 exclamation points. Fortunately for us, the book sold out within 2 or 3 months that we were into a second printing.
Oh, great.
But to get the book finished, and if you think I'm just making this up, if you look at the credits, not the credits page, the indicia for the copyrights and everything. Yeah. That's on the inside cover. And there's a line in there that sometimes they use on DVDs these days when they're saying whoever's talking, it's their thoughts, their ideas. It's got nothing to do with us. We're not responsible.
Yeah. There's a disclaimer or something. Yeah.
Well, you take a look at, there's a disclaimer on Sabre that says, the views expressed in I'm in the general area. The views on this book are those of the author, solely of the author, and not the artist and publisher. And Dean, the only way he finished, the artist did not want just his name being there. He wanted Eclipse's and Dean's name to be there. But obviously, Dean had no problem. Dean Mullaney and I have worked for 40 years together in this business. And there's just everything in the world to tear people apart. We're still best friends.
Right. And the depictions that were at the time risky to them that they're mentioning is the depiction of the childbirth and the kiss between.
Now I had a choice of artists.
Right.
It wasn't like when I was working at Marvel where I didn't have a choice of artists. And I chose Billy Graham because I knew that Billy, I've hung out with Billy. I've met transsexual people with Billy and gay people. And so it wasn't going to be a problem for Billy to draw gay characters.
Right. And kissing.
Billy really was a Renaissance guy. So there wasn't like, I'm going to go in here, oh my God, I got to fight everything just to get the material done.
Right. Just a quick note for the listeners so they know that you were referring earlier to, you actually did a series of Sabre for Eclipse with Billy Graham and then Jose Ortiz. And that the first 2 issues were reprinted the graphic novel in color. So it was like a way to see it in color as well. Another thing also I wanted to kind of ask, you described the origin of Detectives Inc. last time, and you also referred to working with Marshall Rogers. Was there a difference as far as collaboration style or discussion of layouts as a compare and contrast between Rogers and yours approach and Colan's and yours approach?
Well, every artist is different, just as every writer.
Right.
Different. So I was closer with Gene because Gene and I had become very close friends over the years. Mm-hmm. So I was closer with Gene than I was with Marshall. I really didn't see Marshall all that much, except when we first, I saw him sometimes because he was living way uptown in Manhattan. By that time, I'm living in Brooklyn and with Marshall and Rob is born. So, I didn't have the freedom of travel that I did, say, in between 76 and 78. Basically, I could go where I wanted to go when I wanted to go. And here it was like I wasn't going to just take off. And money was tighter at that time, too, because, again, it took, a year and a half or more to get Detectives Incorporated finished, the first book. Mm-hmm. And so, again, it was a thing of trying to survive during the production of that book. But Marshall was great. I mean, I was asking for a lot of stuff. But one of the best reviews for me, there was a gay writer writing about, and it's up on the internet somewhere I think it's called The Writer's Room, and saying how I only had 46 pages. And the fact that the reviewer actually understood the composition of the book, what you're faced with, it's 46 pages. I can do anything I want within the 46 pages, but I'm not going to get any more. It isn't like I can say, oh, can I continue to the next issue or can I do this? It really was a thing where I was locked into the 46 pages. And I'm still really proud of that book, what we handled in it and the way we handled it. And we had Tom Orzechowski lettering. We had Marshall, just doing everything that I asked for and more. I think I had flashback sequences, and I had them like one flashback, another flashback. And there was one where Rainier's ex-wife might be having a flashback on one page. Rainier might be having a flashback on another page. And then at the end, they're both remembering the same thing. Mm-hmm. So like the memory is in the middle. And, it's fairly complex stuff to get across. You need to communicate to the artist what needs to be done. Right. And Marshall took it even a step further. He had two of the flashbacks happening at the same time. I would never have been that audacious to ask for that, but Marshall he put so much time and effort and his talent for doing that kind of things. It was just amazing.
I want to talk about one more Eclipse project. You had mentioned in the last interview that Ragamuffins was somewhat autobiographical. Your childhood was a big part of the script. Dean Mullaney published it in Eclipse in 1983. In 1985, all three stories were packaged as a Ragamuffins one-shot. And Gene Colan did it with pencils, and there was this push to do it with pencils rather than inks. First, was it full script? And was that different than the Marvel method, let's say, that Gene was used to? Was there any issue as far as full script versus the collaborative plot first? And then why did you want it to be straight from the pencils?
Because I love Gene's pencils. And going back from when I was working in editorial at Marvel in the early, like 73 to 75, I saw a lot of original artwork of Gene's and saw the pencils before they were inked. And Gene had a lot of great inkers. But I always wished that some of that texturing that he could do that was so totally Gene that there was a way to capture that. Mm-hmm. And so when the time came to do Ragamuffins, because to be honest with you, I had Ragamuffins set from like about 1969, 70, along with Detectives Incorporated. But when I get a chance to do, we were going to test to see if there was an audience there at the comic book shops. And, I was leaving Marvel and we're going off on our own. I probably would have wanted to do Ragamuffins. But I knew, for me to come off of the Panther and Killraven and Luke Cage and do this series about little kids growing up in the 1950s with flash forwards in time. And eventually there would be back flashes that would show the parents at 5 years old from the early 1900s and up. And it would give you an idea of it would be a look at America, what changed in the 20th century, what didn't, what parents think they're teaching kids, what kids really learn. It was just so many things. And I held that series for years for Gene, because I knew Gene would understand it was all in these kids' faces. And Gene would be able to relate to those little kids. And just to give you an example of a scene, there's one where the mother crosses the little boy, Randy, who's 5, across the main street and tells him he's got to stay on the sidewalk and just stay off the side streets and walk to school. And, and he's listening to everything the mother's saying, and she's reading him the rules and everything. And as soon as she walks away and Randy turns around, and I told Gene, like, when he turns around, Gene, we just see his face. And we know immediately anything is possible. He's on his own now. Nobody can restrict him. He can be anything he wants. And Gene just marvelously, like he's inside my head, could capture that look. Same thing with Nathaniel Dusk. He totally understood, like the 1930s. He lived it. He lived there, in Manhattan. And it was great to be able to print his pencils and have them done correctly there. Going back to Ragamuffins, we're doing the Ultimate Ragamuffins book, and it was supposed to come out last year, but the pandemic, as with the young Sabre material, held everything up. And plus, we're working on reprinting all the Billy Graham Sabre material because his granddaughter has it, and we just have to figure out a way to get it reshot so we can restore all of Billy's artwork, a lot of which was really messed up with bad coloring for 2 books. Just a lot of things that really affected that book. And that's why I said to Marsha, actually, it was later, it wasn't when that started. It was like when the autism stuff came out. Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, Ragamuffins almost sabotaged Sabre, but it's a long, involved, complex story, but it was disheartening. And I think the book is breaking my heart. And, we were off the stands for about half a year. And it took half a year for me to understand what was really going on, what was really holding things up. And part of it was because Ragamuffins got printed in Spain. If Ragamuffins hadn't been printed in Spain, which seemed like a plus when it happened, because Gene and I were going to get paid again for it, it ended up being a nightmare.
You said in Spain, the country?
Yeah. Because for years, the last Ragamuffin story was 20 pages long. It was called The Pack Rat Instinct. And Gene had drawn it, and I had placed all my copy to it. And it was all about collectors. And I know Gene at the time told me, Don, anybody who's a collector, there will not be a dry eye in the house when they get to the end of the story. Well, when Ragamuffins was appearing in Eclipse Monthly, and when that magazine folded, Dean was still going to do Ragamuffins, and they had it in something called Anxiety Times. Well, that book apparently didn't come out. I know it had a Ditko cover, but that book didn't come out, and then they were going to put it somewhere else. Well, somewhere over a time period, the artwork got lost, and had never been found. Wow. So those 20 pages of Gene Colan artwork, which were just beautiful, could be, for over a decade. I searched Canada, searched throughout the United States, any place where it conceivably could have ended up. I think I actually know what happened to the artworks, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm not going to go into detail who might have done what, but Dean found the original scans for all that artwork. So we're going to come out with the Ultimate Ragamuffins that includes 20 pages of Gene Colan pencils never before seen.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So it's going to be great.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also returned to do some work for Warren magazines in 1979 through 1983. You did some work for Rook. What was your impression of the end of Warren at that time while you were returning some work in for them?
Well, I didn't see a lot of Jim then. I don't think Jim actually was in the office very much. Originally, when I first started there, Louise Simonson was the editor. And everything was, Louise and I got along great. I never had any problem working with Louise, that's for sure. I know Louise left. And I can't remember who replaced her. That became a little more problematic, but also I think the magazine itself, the company itself was, I guess nobody was really sure what was going to happen. But The only real incident I remember, and this is after Louise left, I had done a series called The Mist, and it was about a woman who an occult group thinks she's like the reincarnation of this character that they worship. But they're also involved in international skullduggery, and 2 CIA agents are tapping the apartment of the woman who's basically just an average person. So the CIA people have qualms about what they're doing because they're just violating these people's rights on the thought that because of this occult group. And it was very much like Luke Cage, a very New York City story. And it was supposed to be done by an artist in New York City. Well, it wasn't. And for some reason, whoever was editing the book at the time didn't like the artwork for 2 or 3 pages, and they just yanked them without replacing them with anything. But beyond that, they also I had one of the CIA agents saying, like, he, got involved with the CIA because he thought he was going to meet the Dragon Lady. And, now here he is, bugging an innocent family that apparently isn't involved in anything. This editor changes some of the dialogue, and he changed it. I had them talking about Chinese food or something, and the editor changed it to an Asian word, a racist word. And so in fact, I'm so mad when I see it. It was like on a Friday afternoon. I said, I don't even dare call them because I'm so angry that they put this out under my name. And so I waited till the next week, and Monday, and I call them, and I'm really, really upset. So, and a lot of times these people, they think if you're going to behave badly, they want you in a public place. If they're going to behave badly, they want it behind closed doors, so there's no witnesses to what either they said or did. So we go to this restaurant, and I talked about they don't taking the Dragon Lady thing out. I said, why are you taking this stuff about the Dragon Lady out? And they're going, oh, well, nobody knows who the Dragon Lady is. What do you mean? If you're involved in comics, it doesn't even matter. Like, the Dragon Lady is taken on, just the term itself has taken on kind of a perception in and of whether you know Milton Caniff's strip or not, and you personally know the Dragon Lady. The idea of the Dragon Lady, the idea of it, and to think that nobody in comics would understand it would just, yes. And then for them to use this, this slang slur for Asian people. And I bring this up and said, well, Don, we know how your characters would talk. I took the fucking magazine and tossed it across the restaurant. I'm lucky I didn't go over the table and just strangle this guy. And I said, well, you guys got a real problem because it's a continued story, and I'm not writing anymore unless I know I can see it before it goes to print. And you don't rewrite any of my material ever, ever again.
I think there was a page from 1984 or something, and it was a Wally Wizard King page, but the dialogue was totally changed by Bill Dubay into a really sexist, really bad kind of dialogue that was pointed out that Bill Dubay had changed the words to a much worse version. So what you're telling me reminds me of that. How did you get hooked up with DC Comics? Around 83, 84, you started working on Nathaniel Dusk with Gene Colan. Who at DC said, Don, come on over and write something?
First, it was Gene Colan that got me to go over.
Mm-hmm.
You ought to go see Dick Giordano and talk with Dick. And I knew Dick slightly. I didn't know him really well. But I liked Dick. And so I, went to Dick's office, and we were talking, and we both love Private Eyes. And so I mentioned, I had 3 stories in mind. One was Alexander Risk, one was Nathaniel Dusk, and the other was a character, a psychic detective called Sebastian Edge. And I had the 3 names on the back of a notebook. And in fact, originally Alexander Risk was Alexander Dusk, but I didn't like it. I think I just didn't like the sound of Der Dusk. It just didn't flow. But Alexander Risk just flowed, and it was a hint to that character, that the character is taking a risk with his entire life. And with Dusk, and in fact, I would tell the colorist, it doesn't matter if it's high noon. Dusk's world is always dusk. Everything's there. You can see it, but it's not all obvious at first glance. And Edge was the same way. There was like the edge between dimensions of what's real and what's not real. So it was playing. So there were 3 strips I really, really wanted to do.
How was DC in general to work with, let's say, compared to your experience that you had before you at Marvel? Was that just an easier experience? I looked at this 50th anniversary party and footage, and you were in it. Julius Schwartz was there.
That guy was pretty energetic in that video.
That guy in that video. Yeah, you remember, right? And you looked very happy in that video.
Yeah, I love the book.
Yeah, so you had a good time there. It was a positive experience.
Yes, mostly. I mean, especially with the second book, I got to be my own editor. So it was like, there was no, although Alan Gold was fine when we worked on the first book. The only problem was Dean and I had already done Ragamuffins and how to do color and pencils with Gene's, work. So when we were discussing the first Nathaniel Dusk, I said, okay, well, just when it's time to do the coloring, just give Dean a call, because he and I had discussed it, and Dean would tell you what we did, how, technically what you need to do to pull it off. And when the first issue came out of the first series, I got a phone call from Gene. I'm out in Brooklyn. Gene has called me from Manhattan. And Gene he had a copy of the book, and he was all upset. He's going, they ruined my artwork, Don. They ruined it. It says the lines are dropping out everywhere. And I'm going like, well, what are you talking about? There should be everything. And so I said, well, let me go into the city. Let me go see the book. And he was absolutely right. Line work was dropping out all over the place. I hadn't seen the coloring, so there were bright yellows and there were pinks and stuff that you should never see in the world of Nathaniel Dusk. And the artwork, the lines were dropping out of Gene's work. So I went into production and said, well, what's going on here? Didn't you guys call Dean Mullaney to find out how to do this? And they said, well, we're a big company. We're DC. We can't call some small company like Eclipse. So I said, well, let me get this straight. You can't make a phone call to find out how to do it right, and you would ruin Gene Colan's artwork because you can't make a fucking phone call?
Right.
You don't know why I get crazy? That would drive me crazy. So then on the second series, I actually went and spent, Tom Zuko has talked about this. He never had a writer come and spend hours till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning discussing the coloring approach to Nathaniel Dusk. And then we finally get the printing right. And that ends up, the second Nathaniel Dusk series is one of my favorite things I've ever done.
Did you have much interaction with some of the older guys like Julius Schwartz, for example? Did you have much interaction with them? Any story about those kind of guys? Yeah,
I did a Batman story because Digger now asked me after we were doing the Dusk stuff, what was my favorite DC character? And I said, the Batman. And so Dick said, yeah, work a Batman story out. And so I did. And I was very thorough about it because it was dealing with pedophiles. And I was in consulting with somebody who was the head of Vice Squad in the police station down west to make sure I had everything accurate about the kids, what happens in their head, what they think and how they're manipulated. And the story, I think the opening has Batman up on top of one of those going well, maybe I can't stop this from happening in the city. And maybe I can't stop that from there. But nobody's taking kids to my city. And then it's his pursuit. And as the guy who said, if you help one kid or family get through this, find, things to do, to me, well, that would be worth doing. So anyhow, I worked that story up, and apparently Julius Schwartz did not like it.
Oh, really? Okay.
And he called. I wasn't home. He called up and he yelled at my wife. He yelled at Masha. I mean, I'm sorry, Alex. You got a problem with me? Come to me, and we'll handle it face to face. You don't take it out of my wife. You don't yell at my wife. Like now you're asking for trouble. And I got on the phone, man, and I yelled at Julius, give me that story back. I haven't paid a cent for it. If you don't like it, well, give me a gimmick story. I want to do gimmicks. I said, I don't do gimmicks. Send the story back. So years later, I'm at the San Diego Comic-Con, Bob Schreck, and Bob and I are friends. And I talked to Bob, and somehow, so Bob was asking me, how come you're not doing anything for DC? And I said, well, I had this Batman story, and I told him what it dealt with and everything. He said, yeah, well, let me see it. And I said, okay, but just give me 2 pages of it. I don't need the whole script. Well, to be honest with you, editors always say that, but then they're asking you questions of, well, what about this? Or what about that? Well, you said you want 1 or 2 pages. If you want the whole thing, here it is. You've got the script. And I knew with this kind of subject matter, everything was going to have to be very, detailed on how you were handling it, how I was handling it, and what was going to be in the story. And but Bob wanted a 1 or 2 page synopsis. So I did it. And then, Bob wrote me back and said, well, but I can't see the characters, Don. It's like they're wearing kabuki masks. And so I wrote, well, obviously you're trying to impress me that you're more alert than your average comic book editor. But that said, if you want to see what the characters look like, you need to read the script. So that script was under discussion, and then I got a call from Bob. He said, Don, I got to have you. We got to have lunch together. Right. And so we went someplace in Manhattan to have lunch. And he said, Don, I thought I was going to have more control over the projects I was doing than I actually have. And I thought it would be able to, get these things through. But they're making me do stuff with Frank Miller. And if they're making me do stuff with Frank Miller, what do you think they're going to make me do to Don McGregor? And you know what? He was being totally straight with me, totally honest. And I said, I got it, Bob. I understand. You can't, neither one of us are going to be happy if I have to weaken that story and everything. So the story to this day has not yet been done, but I still have it. So who knows? One day, maybe we'll see.
I'd like to see that happen. David Anthony Kraft, who passed away recently.
I love Dak.
When we interviewed him, it was a big impact on me personally, just because he really was one of those major forces that perfected the art of the comic history interview. And so I looked up to him a lot. And as you know, I wrote his obituary for the Comics Journal, and he just meant a lot to me. Of course, he meant more to you because you guys knew each other much longer and were really colleagues and friends. He published some of your work, some of your non-comics work, Dragonflame, Other Bedtime Nightmares, and The Variable Syndrome. Those were prose works. There was an ad I remember seeing with a gun to your head, Don McGregor getting killed by the comics industry. Tell us about that association. How was it writing prose books, and how did that whole venture do?
Dragonflame book, we went into a second printing almost right away. We had a different, because the first cover we used, Dave and I work side by side, and Dave had different cover stocks and designs, and so he had me going through it, and then I picked out one that was a deep maroonish red. And he said, "Of course you would, Don. That's the most expensive cover stock there is." But we went and we did it. Dave did it with that version. The ad. See, Dave wanted me to write the ads, but I wasn't used to writing about myself. Right. Dave wanted me to do introductions, and he wanted me to do the ads. And I kind of resisted him in the beginning. I thought, these are short stories, but they speak for themselves, I think. And and I was still used to, even though I did my own letters pages, there was also always a kind of editorial we, as opposed to say, I'm saying, I thought, I did. So there was still some kind of thin veil between me and the audience. And I said to Dave, I don't know how are you supposed to brag on yourself? I don't know how I would do that. I don't know how to do the ads. And I was walking up I can figure out these days why I walked into a room. I'm walking up Broadway past one of the newsstands, and I see that National Lampoon cover with a gun to the dog's head. And the copy reads, "If you don't buy this magazine, we'll shoot this dog." So, wait a minute.
Was that National Lampoon or something?
Yeah, that was National Lampoon.
Yeah.
The only issue of National Lampoon I ever bought. So I'm on my way up to Dave's. So I got to show this to Dave. Dave, look what National Lampoon is doing. And to be honest with you, I don't know if it was a combination of me and Dave or me. But the idea came, why don't we do an ad? If you don't buy this book, the comics industry will shoot this author. And actually the gun, because it was a real 357 Magnum, we had been firing it up in the hills of Ohio. It was Paul Gulacy's gun, and Craig Russell was with us. I think Craig took the photographs, and that hand holding the gun is Paul Gulacy's.
That's amazing.
And
okay. I didn't know.
And believe me, I wanted to check that gun all the time because I had seen what that gun could do earlier in the day. Like, I always felt like the movies like kind of exaggerated things, but when you fire a 357 Magnum, the flame, does come out of the gun. It sounds like if you fire 3 or 4 times in a row, you're like deaf. And if it hits the small tree branches, it will break right through them. It's like, so like having that gun pointed that way was kind of like, even though I did all kinds of expressions for it, but then that was a way I felt I could do an ad.
Yeah.
And it would be making a commentary on my experiences. I don't think the big companies were used to an upstart writer, doing something like this. And I know, one editor said, if I see that picture one more time, I'll pull the trigger myself in print. And I remember saying to David, yeah, well, apparently the ad gets them. They've got it.
Was it Dave that approached you to publish prose work? How did that start?
I was writing the Dragonflame book already, and I had gone over to Dave's. Dave was doing the Defenders.
Right.
And he was having a real difficulty writing. So he wanted me to come over. The artwork was drawn to Dave's specifications and everything, but the final script hadn't been done. It was done Marvel style. And so Dave said, wait, I'll pay you to write, the last 12 pages of this book. Mm-hmm. So because I wrote them at his place, and while I was writing the Defenders stuff for him, Dave was reading Dragonflame.
Right.
And he really liked it. And so he said, well, maybe there was an introductory chapter to Dragon that was isolated and unto itself. And I think Dave said, maybe we'll publish that. And then I said, well, I've got other short stories that I've done from the 60s on. And so I know Dave started reading those, and then it was said, well, why don't we do a collection? Let's do a bunch of the stories. And that's what he was talking to me about, doing the introductions. And eventually when I did the first one, I'm sure Dave probably felt like I just created the Frankenstein monster. Because then I thought, okay, the thing is that every story was different and from different time periods. And I thought we should write about that. It's not particularly about what those stories are about, but where I was at when I was writing them. And so that began the first introductions. And then some of the stuff I was reading to you, Investigating Detectives Incorporated, that was in the back of the Variable Syndrome book that Dave published. Mm. And Dave, of course, was, very much against the work for hire contracts. Mm-hmm. So, but when I wrote that stuff for him, that went into the back of that book. And at some point, Ain't It Cool News website did a review on that piece, saying that anybody who's interested in working in comics probably should read this piece, because it does talk a lot about what writers have to face. It isn't about just writing the stories. And, every gig that you get, a lot of times you may think you only have to make these strong decisions in the beginning, but if your name is going on those stories and you're going to have to live with those stories, it means probably there's going to be more than one time that you have to, fight for the stories. If you don't believe in them, how can I expect you to believe in it, Alex? Or Jim, whoever.
So you and Gene worked on the sequel to Detectives Inc. as a 3-issue miniseries around 1987.
Well, it was a screenplay and I was directing the movie. That was not the storyline that I originally was going to do. The original story was going to be called A Horror of Burning Places, and it was about the bombing of abortion clinics. Because as you know, Alex, I'm always looking for safe subject matter. And I actually had cleared with the arson inspectors that as long as I signed my life away, I could go to the places that had been burnt down, because I really wanted to. I felt it was the only way I could, if I could experience what the things were like, I would know what things smelled like, what they looked like, what the people who have to do that for a living, what they do. And so that was the story I was going to do. When the chance came to write and direct a Detectives Incorporated movie, well, I knew I wasn't going to have the money to go around blowing up buildings. And so I was looking around for something that I wanted to write about, and I felt was, important enough to do a Detectives Incorporated story around. And I was watching TV late one night, and I think I was just flicking through the channels, and I saw some kind of thing where people were talking, but it was about domestic violence and the numbers of the amounts of abuse that happened in this country. I haven't kept totally up to date with it, but the figures were so huge and so astounding. I said, well, I need to research this. And this seems like something worth writing about. And so that's how A Terror of Dying Dreams came about. I'm selling those books at San Diego Con, right? And my daughter lives, in San Diego. So one is called A Remembrance of Threatening Green, and the other is called A Terror of Dying Dreams. And then we had the Sabre, we had all the books in different boxes. But when I'm sitting at the table and we're signing things, like if you look back, like, oh my God, which book is that in? Which box is that in? So like I wrote in big red letters on the boxes like Sabre, Green, Terror, like, so that all of the, I would know which box I had to go to get that particular book. So now my daughter's left me off at the airport and she's going back home, and I'm on the plane, and something over the loudspeaker, is Don McGregor on this plane? How does anybody know that Don McGregor's on this plane? What the hell's that? So then they call it again. And I said, yeah. So you need to come out here. And they lead me out onto the guide walk. And there's all these very, very stern looking men and women, all apparently FBI people, and I don't know what's going on. And they go, are you Don McGregor? Yeah. Did you write Detectives Incorporated? Yeah. Because we got boxes out there. We see the word terror written in red on the box. I said, wait a minute. Do you really think that if there was a terrorist, they would actually write in big red letters? And I swear to God, the woman is afraid to go, Don, this isn't a joke. Okay, I got it. I had no idea that anybody it never even crossed my mind. So eventually the books did get allowed on board the plane, that they were just books.
Don McGregor's always in the thick of the action. That's for sure. Yeah. The new Panther's Quest from Marvel Comics Presents. Jim has some questions.
Am I boring you guys?
No, it's not boring. Okay. And I love it. I'm pretty sure Jim loves it too.
Okay. I need something positive here.
What I love is how you tell the stories. Everything that you say, there's passion. To me, so far, it feels like whatever has happened, adversity or victories, there was passion either way. I find it very fascinating and fun. You're like the Van Gogh of comic writers or something. So
wait a minute, let me see if I got an ear. Hold on. That ear, I'm not sure.
And we really appreciate you lending us your ear today. So, all right. So Jim, go for it.
So Don, I want to talk about the comic itself for the Panther's Quest, which you did in Marvel Comics Presents 13 through 37. in 1989. What was it like that you had been off of Panther for a long time, and in the meanwhile, Jack Kirby had done his run, and there had been other things. What was it like going back to the Panther?
When I came back to do Panther's Quest, Michael Higgins kept wanting me to do the Panther. And I said, no, I'm not coming back. I love the Panther, but I didn't want to come back and fight with them all the time.
Right.
You know, I don't want to go and spend 30 to 40% of my energy fighting with you guys over what's in the book. You know, I love Chala, but I don't want to. So I think there were about 2 or 3 months worth of haggling over that. Right. And once I said I would do Killraven because Craig was interested in drawing it, that's when I got. Then as soon as I said that, Michael Higgins said, "Oh, then we're doing Killraven."
Right.
No, and then he said, "Now we're doing the Panther." I said, "No." And then I said something like, "I always wanted to take him to South Africa," and Michael Higgins says right away, "We're doing it. We're doing it." No, we're not doing it because it's not going to be a story. The Black Panther goes in to South Africa and solves apartheid. That's not the story I want to do. He said, good, what we're going to do it, Don. And I swear to God, guys, I'm not making this up. Yeah. The very day that I've written the first 2 pages of the story, Michael Higgins calls me about midnight and he goes, Don. I said, yeah. He said, I'm off the book. Uh-huh. And I go, well, what do you mean you're off the book? I'm not doing the book. Well, wait a minute, it's your book. He said, yeah, but I'm going. I'm not there anymore. And I thought he was kidding me. I thought, because I had put him off for so long, I thought, oh, he's just like, say, oh, I'll teach Don. I'll tell him off the book. He really was off the book. And I didn't know what that meant about the project. And I called the editor-in-chief and said, okay, well, who's editing this book? And they're telling me, oh, it doesn't matter who's editing it. Oh, yeah, it definitely matters who's editing it because it means whether I'm going to write the book or not. You know, a lot of times the editors think they're judging you, whether they want you for their project. Going into the 80s and 90s, my view was completely the opposite. I'm looking at you to see whether we can work together and whether you believe in this project. And if you don't, I'm going to go elsewhere. So, but I met Terry Kavanagh, and man, did I ever luck out.
Oh, good. The editor-in-chief at that point was Tom DeFalco, I think, right?
Yes, one of the bizarrest, most surreal conversations I ever had in the halls of Marvel Comics was with Tom DeFalco over Panther's Prey. And so I'm going in, the 3rd issue of Panther's Prey has come out, and that's basically Monica Lynn's book. She's in it throughout. And there's a sequence where about half the book is Chala and Monica together discussing whether they should get together and have sex or not, and what the ramifications, all the reasons why they shouldn't. And like, it's a lot of times it doesn't matter what kind of even clarity the people may have. If the desire is so strong, it's really going to be hard to deny that. So that scene was a long scene. And when the book came out, I had, of course, I'd seen the artwork, I'd seen the coloring. I was involved in every part of that project. And Steve Matson doing the coloring, he was absolutely, great. So it was like Terry like backed me on everything on that. And I walked into the office and I was going to see the 3rd issue, and Terry said, "Yeah, get him over here, take a look down." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I got to go to the bathroom and come back and I'll look at it." So I go into the bathroom, and when I'm finished, I'm over at the sink, and I don't know how he knew I was in there, but in the stall, one of the stalls, is Tom DeFalco. And he says, "Don, you could cost Terry Kavanagh's job. They know how to get to you. They know the things to use against you." Like I didn't even know. I don't know how he knew I was there because those are closed doors. I wasn't speaking to anybody. Yeah. So
you know what happened? His spider sense went off. That's what happened.
That might be it. Well, so then I said, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. So when he comes out, we get out into the corridors, and he's very upset. He said, "You've got Monica Lynn in that book without panties." Now, Alex, there's many things I may forget, maybe not notice. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that if there were panels in there where Monica was without panties, I think I would have spotted that. I think I would have known.
I'll do a deep search later today to try to find those.
Where do you find that book? Oh, and she definitely looks sexy. There's no doubt about that. So, like he's going on a tirade about it. And finally I said to him, well, Terry's got the books up there. Let's go look at the books. So we go to Terry's office and he takes that Panther's Prey 3, goes through it. And he said, oh, I guess there wasn't any pages with or without panties. Throws the book on Terry's desk and walks out. No apology, nothing like, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. I don't know why I thought that, or somebody told me that and I just believed it. Gone. So anyhow, the book exists the way it exists. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love the character. So like I said, I was resistant about coming back to the character because there were a lot of fights over it when I was originally doing it.
Right.
And I just didn't want to put myself in a situation where once again I was having to either defend or fight for anything I was doing with the character. And I thought, no, I don't want to do it under those circumstances. And Michael kept assuring me that we wouldn't. And also, I had never read any of the other Black Panther stuff that had been done. Not because I think that whatever I did was better or worse than what the other people had done. Like people will ask me about Jack Kirby coming on and doing the Panther. Well, number one, Jack Kirby doesn't have to ask Don McGregor or anything. He's Jack Kirby, like without Jack and without Stan and without Steve Ditko and without Gene Colan, people like that, the books that we come to and love so much wouldn't exist. So Jack can do anything, as far as I'm concerned, that he wants. But my feeling was I wasn't going to read the books. Part of the problem was I was so involved with the character because every day, for almost 3 years, I'm trying to hear Chala's voice in my head. How would he handle this? What would he think? So the characters become very real to you in many ways because you're living with them all the time. You live with them more than you do most of the people that you meet in your daily life. And I thought, I don't see any win situation in here because people also are going to ask, well, what do you think of that person's work? Or what do you think of this person's work on the Panther? And I don't see how you can come to it objectively when you're so personally involved in the thing. I just thought it's better for me. Like it's already a painful experience. I didn't get to finish the Panther versus the Klan. I didn't, I had plans for those books but they're cut off. And I felt, what? Now I was investing my time in Sabre. So that was gone. And by the time we were coming back, one of the prerequisites I had is I didn't have to read anything. I could take the character from where I left off and then start. And that became like the first issue of Panther's Quest. And that ended up escalating because when Gene came aboard as the artist, he was doing stuff at DC, and something happened where suddenly he needed pages right away. And I didn't even yet have why the Black Panther's mother, hadn't been heard from him. It was in South Africa. And everything I came up with, well, it doesn't answer this. Why not this? And then I swear to God, just the day or two before, I'm going to start writing the thing. And Gene calls and says he needs pages. It suddenly all came to me. I understood what the end, how it ended, what answered all the questions. And I'm ready to get down longhand as fast as I can. And thank God, because but I didn't have the villains. I didn't have the plot structure yet. I knew how it was going to end, and I knew what the story was. And thematically, I knew what I wanted to go after. But I was still going up to the Schomburg Museum and doing research 2 or 3 days a week. And they were really great to me, finding, because you needed to have photographic reference and you needed to have references that spoke about this aspect of apartheid. And they were really, really great. And I know one of the people at the museum said to me, Don, are they really going to print this at Marvel? And I said, well, all I know is I'm going to write it. If you see it, then yes, they did. And so it was... the hardest thing about it was doing it in the 8-page chapters, because that kind of changed the, you always had to be contending with that aspect of it. However, when I was writing, now I'm 4 issues in, Gene is drawing it. And I had now had the name of the lead villain, the person that we eventually would learn has the Panther's mother. And I'd gone off on vacation. And when I came back, it was very hard to see much stuff on South Africa in that time period. And but I came back, and it was a National Geographic that had a whole feature on South Africa. So I'm browsing through it, and I see this name. It's the name of the villain. He actually exists, and he's in the civic courts of South Africa. And I call up Terry. Terry, I have to change the names of that character. He's real. There's a real person with that name. And I had to find a name that you could, I think it was 5 letters for the first name, so that we could change it throughout. And very often Marvel doesn't date when a story's taking place. But if you notice, Panther's Quest, I think, says June 1983, I think it is, something like that. And again, when I was going through that National Geographic, they had changed the passport laws. So what I had written was thoroughly accurate for the time period I was writing it, but now in that intervening month, they had changed the passport laws. So I said to Terry, there's no way, Gene's already drawn it. The only way we can make this accurate is set it in this particular time when the passport laws were still intact.
You're getting exactly where I was going with these, so I don't have to ask the questions, because you're writing something that's evolving. If you had written this when you originally were going to write it, it would be an entirely different story to some degree, and certainly the experience of writing it would be a very different experience from what you were in, at this point in time when things are changing and when it's very much in the public consciousness in a different way than it was back when you were thinking of it as like the first story, right?
I personally think I'm a better writer in the 1980s. And maybe it's because I didn't have as much traumatic stuff going on as it was in the 70s. But also, with Nathaniel Dusk, I had enough room to do the story that I wanted to do. With Panther's Quest, originally, if you know this business, most often when something is done one way, that gets set in cement pretty quick. So Marvel Comics Presents were basically 8-page chapters, and normally they ran 8 books, maybe 10 for a lead feature. Whereas obviously Panther's Quest, I think around about chapter 12, Terry says, Don, I got to give him something, because whenever we have editorial meetings, they want to know how many chapters is this going to be? And I'm still researching it. As I research it, it influences what the new scenes are going to be and where the story is going to go. I don't know until I, delve into that aspect of South Africa. So I said to Terry, to be honest with you, Terry, I don't know. And I said, tell him 25. 25 seemed like it's all I could think of. And so then, God bless Terry. I'm sure Terry got so much flack on that, and he shielded me from it all. Because I know there was a sequence of Panther's Prey where I didn't find out till last year. Man, they were having things on the carpet, and I swear to God, not a word was said to me. I didn't even know any of that was going on. So while we were doing the Panther's Quest, at one point, there was a piece of information that I needed to get to the audience, but I needed to get to it. It was one of the major characters, Zonti Kane, was going to get shot. So the information that, after that, there's no way to give the audience the information that it needs. And I said, I need, but I can't fit it in 8 pages. So I went to Terry and I said, Terry, I'm not trying to drive you crazy. I know all your inventory. You've only got 8-page stories. I need 10 pages for this chapter. I said, Don, I can't do it. I said, I will write any character you want, a 6-page story, and I'll have it for you at the same in time for that issue with the Black Panther. And he said, any character? And I said, yeah, Submariner. So I went, and that's how Danger in Paradise, I think it's called. Marsha actually colored it. And Jim Lee drew it. And it's believe it or not, a totally silent Don McGregor story. However, the first version I wrote wasn't silent. Hey, you know what? Only I would go back and rewrite the entire thing. And, like, okay, let's do the silent version. And then, and then just one more thing. At the end, when I was finally on chapter 23, I couldn't have as big an ending as I wanted. So I went to Terry and I said, Terry, sincerely, I need 16-page chapters at the end. Can we do double-sized? And Terry said, do whatever you want, Don. And that's why you get to have that really big ending of 16 pages. And thank God it was Gene Colan and Tom Palmer and everybody doing the artwork and could get it out.
How was Colan in doing it? Like, you had to adjust your writing clearly, to do those smaller segments, but you had talked about him and how he approached comics with that limited amount of space where things were going to be very tight and very controlled. Was it actually easier for him to keep it in line, or was it harder for him?
No, Gene was Gene. I mean, I don't know that he ever thought one job was more difficult than another. I know he didn't like to do, like he said, well, I would be good at doing James Bond because he didn't really like doing high-tech gear and things like that. I think he liked doing the Panther stuff. And both he and Adrian liked the storyline. Obviously it was something, we were handling something important, and it was like just great working with Gene on it. I've got a great Gene Colan story on there. Since you asked, now I'll give you this. I think I wrote about it probably when he reprinted the book whole. There's about the middle of the story, there's a sequence where there's something that's called necklacing that went on in South Africa at the time. And if you were part of the black townships, if you were a spy for the white government and you were caught, they would put an automobile tire over your head and around your neck, filled with gasoline, and set it afire. And I knew I couldn't avoid it. Like, if it was just me being cowardly and not refusing to address what's really happening there. But some incidents in the story, like you have like only a limited number of ways you can go. So for instance, if this guy is being threatened by the township and he's got the tire, like, well, one, the Black Panther can come in and save him. But that kind of makes a political statement. And I want to keep the story very human because at its core, the story is about a son trying to find his mother and how a racist regime can make the most basic human drive almost impossible. So, the other way that could go is that the Panther goes to save him when he gets killed. So there weren't many ways that I didn't like it. Everything I hated. And I know I'm coming up to the scene. I got to figure out something that I should do. And so I had put a little boy in it called Theodore Olibogang. And earlier in the story, he was only meant for that one appearance. Suddenly I realized, wait a minute. If I bring the little kid back and an innocent victim is caught up in this, it keeps the story very human. And within that 1 8-page installment, it kind of makes a statement of what the story is about, the main theme all the way throughout. So I brought Theodore back and I gave him brother Wally Olibogang. Basically, it's the beaver cleaver in South Africa, Wally and the Beav. And it's like little Theodore that gets caught in the flames. And the Panther, there's a chapter where Chala is in tears holding this little boy, and he's going to get him to the White Hospital to try to save him. And the whole chapter is just him trying to get the kid there. And that at the end of it, the doctors come out and they really tried to save the kid, but Theodore's died. So I get this call about midnight from Gene. And Gene would just love to call at midnight. I think he worked oftentimes at night. And Gene goes, I can't do it, Don. You can't do what, Gene? Don't ask me to do it. I can't. You can't do what, Gene? I tried to do it, Don, and I can't do it. So we're not doing it. We're not doing what, Gene? You know what, Don? No, I don't know what. So we go like this for like about 5 minutes. And then Gene goes, the kid. It's about the kid. What about the kid? The kid doesn't die. I said, what? I said, no, the kid doesn't die. It's too heartbreaking, Don. I can't do it. I tried. And it hurts me too much. Every time I try to draw it, I can't do it. Don't ask me. You're hurting me too much. I said, Gene, and now I'm like panicked because to me, that emotional moment is what I want. I don't want the audience off the hook. I want them to feel what Gene is feeling. I want them to care. And I feel like that scene has done that. And so I don't know. Gene must go on because he knows for about 10 minutes. I'm like, no, there's no way. And I'm begging him, Gene, please, you got to do it this way. It just weakens the story. And then finally, Gene just goes, get out of here, Don. I do it exactly the way you want. And so Gene would, he just, people don't know that a lot of times Gene would like to tease you,
So the whole time it was just a joke. He had already done it.
Yeah, he'd already drawn it.
Oh, that's great. I've never heard that story.
I think when he realized I was probably going to have a stroke, I'm going to tell Don. Okay, Don, I did it. I drew it just exactly as you wanted.
Let's talk about the next Panther story that you did, and the last one you did, the 1991 Panther's Prey. What were the circumstances that made you go back and do a third or fourth, depending on how you count it, story?
Well, I told you right from the very beginning, I had thought about that they would all be novels.
Yeah.
So there was Panther's Rage, and really there was supposed to be the South Panther's Quest, but that didn't happen. The Panthers, the Klan stuff happened instead. So when I came back, because I had mentioned, I still had it in the back of my head that I wanted to do the South Africa stuff. And then when it became feasible to actually do it, and then they wanted to do another, Terry wanted me to do another Panther story. And so then it was like, okay, come back to Wakanda, because a lot of people wanted to see those characters, Wakabi and Taku and, Ramonda and, all of those characters.
Sure. It's been a long time.
It was a challenging thing. I mean, it was kind of scary because so many people had really powerful, strong feelings for those Panther's Rage stories. And so you better come with something, if the story doesn't hold up, people go, oh man, I wish he hadn't come back and done it. So we worked really hard on it. And one of the best decisions I ever made art-wise, Gene Colan wasn't going to be able to draw it. It was tied up with other stuff. So I was looking through different artwork that Terry had, and I hadn't seen any, I think it was actually after hours at the Xerox machine, Xeroxing some artwork to take a look at, take home and try to determine who should be drawing this thing. And while I was at the Xerox machine, Chris Ivey came up to me, and Chris said, "I'm going to use Dwayne Turner on the Panther book." And I said, I don't know, Dwayne. I've only seen 8 pages of his artwork, and it was like nothing. It was like a Marvel War Room kind of story or something. Nothing like the kind of stuff I was going to be doing. And then Chris said to me, "Well, the Black Panther is his favorite character." And so then I thought, well, I'd rather have somebody who's just starting out, but loves the character, and it won't just be another gig, because it's not going to be another gig, just another gig. To me, it's going to be important. And I couldn't have chosen better. I mean, I don't know. Right from the get-go, Dwayne and I, we just got along famously. We became friends with our families. I used to visit with, when he was still on the East Coast, visit Dwayne and Robin all the time. And in fact, when I'm out on the West Coast, Dwayne is one of the people I'll see. And the other one who's also on the West Coast is Mike Mayhew, because, again, Mike was just starting out. And again, like twice, I got really, really lucky. These people really had talent, and they were willing to work hard at it. Like I had some artists say to me, "Are you write difficult scripts, Don?" I said, "Yeah, I don't do easy. If you're looking for easy, you need to go someplace else." That's not what this is about.
Overall, you've been incredibly lucky, haven't you, with your artist collaborations?
Yeah, absolutely.
When I think about it, I also thought, sadly, I think out of the Black Panther artists, none of them are living, are they?
Dwayne Turner is, no, Gene and Billy and Rich. See, I mean, Rich, just the other day, I posted up on my Facebook page, and you know how they do those memory things. And they had one where it's Rich, because I was facing some really serious health problems at the time. And here's Rich, who had obviously really, I don't think it was known at the time how severe his health problems were. But Rich writing about, give Don some support, let him know, you know, you care about him. And the fact having that in Rich's words was very, very fortunate. They didn't want Rich Buckler on that Black Panther book. Rich Buckler was too important an artist. And if Rich hadn't just said, no, I'm working with Don on it. And I don't know that I would have gotten to do those books because they weren't reading them, but they were looking at the artwork. So Rich's artwork was so powerful that, you know, even though they really did, after the first issue with Killmonger and Richard put Killmonger on the cover, I was told that Killmonger couldn't appear on any other covers. And I think that just, they weren't used to a Black character that was that angry, that bitter, that strong, that ferocious. And if you think I'm just saying that, look at the covers. Killmonger doesn't come back until after a year, and there's a cover Rich drew with the wolves, the ice wolves attacking him against that snowy background. And I guess editorial decided the wolves aren't enough. And so what they did, they had Rich draw like a little Killmonger action figure. Like the wolves don't get changed at all. Like the little action figure is posed between their legs or something like that. And then there's a sign, he's back, Killmonger. I guess they felt it needed a villain on the cover. And then they allowed him to be on the cover for the last book. But don't think that the ending, oh man, if people were going crazy when the ending on the cliff and the little boy Kanto comes into it. Oh man, they weren't expecting that. And let's just say it wasn't a harmonious reaction.
I could talk about Black Panther with you like for the entire day, because it was one of the most formative comics for me, because I was 12 or 13 and it meant everything to me. I mean, it was the comic that got me, that why I'm sitting here right now, probably. So right. I almost hate to leave Black Panther, because this is the last Black Panther conversation I may have with you, and it's been a pleasure talking about that character.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you for your kind words. It's people like yourselves, you know, and people who have reacted to what these characters in these books have meant to them. And I'm fortunate that every book, some people like, that's the one, you know, and then, you know, so I'm glad there are people who like Detectives Incorporated as much as they like Killraven or the Panther. Or,
oh, yeah,
you know.
Absolutely. Okay, you did Lone Ranger and Mars Attacks in 1993 and 94 for Topps. How did you get set up for Topps, and how did you approach those licenses?
Jim Salicrup and I have been friends since he first started at Marvel in 1973. So I've known Jim since he was about, I think he was between 14 and 16 when he started doing stuff at Marvel, working, you know, doing whatever. He helped me with those backup pages. Jim found a lot of the stuff for the backup pages that I would say, like the original Kirby covers, I would have had no idea where to go for them. And Jim certainly was one of the people. He knew my work going back to the Warren days. In fact, in something that Jim was doing for some magazine, doing an interview, like they had a thing about like favorite stories, favorite colors, I don't know. And anyhow, the story that he put down at the time was the night the snow spilled blood that Tom Sutton drew. And so Jim has a story about how much that when he saw it, he had to run over and tell. He wrote the X-File comics.
Right.
And it was a friend of his. And so, I often joke with Jim. I said, yeah, Jim says, the night the snow spilled blood, that's your best story, Don. You peaked then. Too bad you peaked so early. And it's just kind of a standing joke.
Yeah.
But so I was close with Jim, and Jim was the one who I never thought I would get a chance to write a Spider-Man story. And it was Jim that came to me and asked me if I wanted to do a Spidey story. And I used to bring my son. My son was about, I guess, 10, 11, somewhere in that area. So he had the full run of Marvel Comics. And he used to hang out with Jim. Mm-hmm. And I think Rob thought every kid gets to do that. Because he would get to do that. And I thought, okay, I wanted to do a story. I said to Jim, well, I want to do a story about guns. Right. That's been something on my mind. The gun thing isn't just happening now, it's happening then. And so Jim said, go ahead and do it. And so it was going to be a 2-part story. And I wrote, and Jim, because I didn't talk to Marshall Rogers at all. It was Jim that thought, I like Detectives Incorporated with Marshall. Let me see if I can bring Don and Marshall back together again. And he found Marshall was no longer living in the city. He was, I'm not actually sure where, but anyhow, Jim located him and he said okay to the story. And so, I actually took Rob out. I had a guy who was with the fire department. We went to where the cops in the Bronx have a shooting range. And I took Rob out there to make sure he could shoot all the guns that I said this kid's going to have in the story. And because I really try to research these things with the people who know this kind of stuff. And so then hopefully you come up with something of value and maybe it just being capturing what it's really like. Mm-hmm. And but the story somewhat was motivated by the fact I was editing the Detectives Incorporated movie, and there's a scene where the Denning character played by Alex Simmons is talking about why he doesn't want to carry a gun. Because in the first detective story, he had to kill a kid. And so he doesn't want to have to carry a gun. And we're actually working on editing this sequence on the film. And I get a phone call, and he said, your son has just been attacked by a gang and held at gunpoint. And the synchronicity of it, that I'm working on this very subject matter, and find out that Rob at 3:00 in the broad afternoon, he was taking soda bottles back to the soda place, asked him to take them and, cash them in. He's walking down the bright daylight, and these 5 people come and take him behind the store. They said for him to give him all their money. And then he thought he had, and they said, if we find any money on you, and they put a 9mm in his mouth and threatened to kill him if they found any money on him. And fortunately, one of the houses on the side streets saw the activity and came out, and they ran away. But my son had gone through this terrible thing, and then we had to go to the police precinct, and he was going through the mug books and actually spotted one of the people. And it said, well, we don't know if we can catch me. We'll see. They're out in the Bronx somewhere. They're part of some kind of gang. And I remember walking out with Rob, and Rob asked me, oh, Dad, did they have to kill me before the cops would do something? So what do you say to your son on a situation like that?
Right.
So anyhow, that was like the motivation for me to write that Spider-Man story. And that was thanks to Jim. And so but the problem was, Jim had been at Marvel for years. And Jim really liked the first story. So he said, well, I think I'm going to just run it, rather than put it in the new Spider-Man title, I'm going to run it as a collection, collect it into one volume. And me being me, I said, look, there's a couple of scenes I couldn't put in. Can I get extra pages? So Jim says, okay, yeah, you got 4 extra pages, whatever it was. Never asking for more money. Give me more pages. I need these pages so that I can put this back in the story. And, but then after that was done, I don't know, somebody was late with the Spider-Man title. And Jim said, I don't want to run something, secondary. So I got to take that story and put it in the next 2 issues of Spider-Man. Okay, so right about that time, and you'd have to ask Jim more about this, I don't know. Jim got the offer from Topps to become executive editor. And the problem was that even though the story had been approved by Jim, it was all written, it was all drawn, part of the story at the end of it, and I worked this out with Jim, saying, here's what I want to do. Spidey's got a spider sense. He knows this little kid, because he's trying to find this kid before some kind of accident happens with the gun. And Spidey's in a dangerous situation. And the little boy wants to help Spidey. He's going to save him. And when he shoots, he actually shoots Spidey. And blood comes spurting out. And dramatically, that just would have, I built that thing up for 40 some pages so that when you got there, that was going to have some kind of emotional impact. Well, then somebody else came in to edit over those books and said, oh, no, Spidey can't get shot. Now, this is all about who's got the power and who doesn't. And, because they could have just left that story alone. And Jim fought for it, but Jim was on his way out to go to Topps. And the closest they would let me come is a bullet went through his webbing. They wouldn't let him get shot at all. And to me, if that story, because again, I was working with people who dealt with gun issues on a daily basis. If we helped one kid, if that story stayed with some people and helped them, then to me, that was worth it. And certainly you didn't have to start a thing with Don McGregor. You could have gone and edited your own books. It wasn't like I went off and did it on my own. I went to my editor. It was drawn, it was done. And then suddenly this is going to be censored. Mm-hmm. And that person came up to me when I was getting the Bill Finger Award. And my kids know about this guy. So he's trying to get to you. And my grandson and my daughter are trying to keep me away from this guy. And because Lauren's a very attractive young woman, this German guy wants a photograph of her. And as I turn, that person's like right there. Say, hey, I want to congratulate. I said, you need to get the fuck away from me. Mm. The only way this is ever going to be right is if you can repair that story to where it was before you had to sabotage it. Because other than that, you can't make it right. So Am I still emotional about it? I said that I was talking with Rob. We're coming out of the Avengers thing. I said, well, you'll notice in my old age, I've calmed down. Maybe not completely.
But that's good. I'm glad you addressed the Spider-Man because that was something that we had wondered about. In the later 90s, kind of mid to later, approaching other licenses as well. You did James Bond's GoldenEye in 96 with Dark Horse. You did Jurassic Park, Lost World. Like you mentioned, there was X-Files. Then there was also Dracula versus Zorro in 93, and you had gone on to do more with Zorro later. What were you doing with Dracula versus Zorro and approaching the character in general with the newspaper strip with Todd Smith and Tom Yeates?
Again, boy, did I have a great series of artists to work with.
That's right.
Originally, Jim came to me about doing Zorro as a series, as a monthly series. And I had never done a monthly book before. I wanted to work with Jim, but I also knew that was going to take, if I said yes, it was going to be a major section of my life. And I didn't know whether I wanted to do that, Joy McDuffie had been talking to me, I guess, about doing some stuff for Milestone. Right. So in the beginning, when Jim first talked to me about it, I wasn't sure. And Joy McDuffie was talking to me. Milestone was starting up. And I had this really strong story that I wanted to do somewhere. It dealt with AIDS, the race card, and a lot of different stuff. But I didn't have a character for it. And then Marvel was actually asking me to come and do an X-Men thing with Professor X. I know what they wanted. They wanted me to develop this like alien planet, kind of the way I do with Wakanda. Like they just had the idea down. But you know, I didn't really care for the people. I said, they're going to get all the benefit from it. I'm sure there's more money in it, but it's going to be a fight. And so then I went to Jim and said, okay, I'm going to do the Zorro thing. And then I went to San Diego and I went with Dwayne McDuffie and Dennis Colan to the Spaghetti Factory. And they were talking about me doing something at Milestone. And in fact, they sent me all of the Bibles that Dwayne had done. Holy moly, were they thorough. And I talked to Dwayne about the storyline I wanted to do, that I had just mentioned to you, and he didn't balk at any of it. So I went home and I was reading the Bibles, but I already was committed to Jim for Zorro, and I knew there's no way I could do a monthly book. On top of that, Jim was adding things to it. So I had, written the first 3 issues. So I knew what time period I had things set, and I was introducing all the major characters from Lady Rawhide and Machete and Moonstalker and the different characters. And then Jim said, we're going to do a Zorro Zero. I said, but Jim, I'm on book 3. He said, nevertheless, you're going to do it. I don't care. You make it mind-numbingly brutal. You got 12 pages. Just do it. So now I'm having to come up with that story. And then Jim, because I wasn't originally scheduled to do Zorro versus Dracula. And it ended up, the person that was going to do it was committed to other stuff and wasn't going to have time to do it. So Jim says, I'm going to have you do Dracula versus Zorro. Well, doing Zorro is a particular, when you're doing research, you got the mission system, you got early Los Angeles, you've got the Indian cultures. There's so many things to research. But suddenly if you're doing Dracula versus Zorro, now we're over in Spain, not California. And then I have to make sure the only way I could see that this worked is that you came with respect for the mythos of Zorro and Dracula. And then I had, Tom Yeates drawing it. And that's a gorgeous looking book.
It's a beautiful book. I mean, one of my favorites. It's just gorgeous. His Dracula is, every scene of that is just amazing.
It's just amazing. If I designed a page like the page with Zorro doing the Flaming Z over the 3 panels, I designed that page. And I was doing, the Gene Autry Museum was doing a Zorro exhibit. And the Zorro people wanted me to go there. When I got there, it was great. I mean, they were showing films, they had costuming, and they had that page up. And the only person who got credit on it was Tom. Now, I don't want credit for anything I didn't do. But God damn it, that page would not exist if I didn't do that work. And I said, I'll walk out of the Autry Museum now. I said, I get a credit line on there. I don't want credit for anything I didn't do. But if I work my ass off to get, to try to make that story work, I want the credit for it. And later we worked on the newspaper strip with Tom.
Right.
And I always love newspaper strips. I love the challenge of the storytelling, trying to get people to come back and buy a paper the next day saying, I got to see what happens next. And Tom was just great to work with. And to be in the daily news and papers like that, the kid who saw the comics in the 1950s, when I was 6 years old, it was like, it meant something. And I really, again, the Zorro newspaper strip is probably in my top five favorite things I've ever done.
Tom lives close to me. Him and Bud Plant and some other people came over to my house for an afternoon, a couple months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. But Tom is great. We were going over his Prince Valiant and some other things. And what's interesting is he doesn't like superheroes that much, but he likes costumed adventurers like Zorro and other things, and Prince Valiant and whatever. But even though he has this like classic illustration and he has a very smooth, soft, kind demeanor, it was funny. He was saying he really has a very social activism side to him that's like very passionate and very strong. And and the way he was talking about that, for me, it was like interesting to see that there was like this classicist, but then someone that actually likes a little bit of civil action and civil disobedience.
Alex, you brought up something I just wanted to raise real quickly. You were describing Yeates, and you said, you know, that he was a traditionalist sort of, but that he had this other side that was a social activist.
Absolutely, yes.
I thought you were talking about that you were going to link him with Zorro, because that's what that
Zorro is like that, actually.
Zorro's exactly like that too, which leads me to a question to Don. In terms of Zorro is an odd character in that he's in Western settings, but he's not. The story isn't necessarily strictly Western. In some ways, it requires more research, and it's a period piece, and it has that masked hero aspect to it. So I know you were a big Ed McBain fan and other mainly more hard-boiled detective kind of things. Are you a Western fan? What was it like writing?
Western? First of all, I love pop culture. Everything in my life mostly has been about how close to real life can you make pop culture? And I think I realized, looking back on the books, that, and I don't know if this is true enough, but it might be, that there was like an awareness, say, hey, pop culture lied to me about this. And like, there was like, well, let's try to rectify that lie a little bit and get closer to, stuff that really moves us as human beings and everything. So there was certainly an element of that. But if you're doing your own stunts and movies and you're writing this stuff, well, obviously you really love it. And Zorro was one of those characters that I really, really loved. Same thing with James Bond. If you had ever told a kid living in Rhode Island that one day I'd get to write James Bond, I was like, what? Are you guys crazy? Why would they let me write James Bond? But I was a fan of the books before there were movies. So, those are just great. I have one regret with the Bond stuff. There were a number of things, like, because the stuff was being done overseas, and you were asking about licensed characters. Well, in the beginning, you had to sign so many things. So I had to sign a thing that said you wouldn't bring any notoriety or shame to James Bond. And, I said, well, what do I have to do? Fuck sheep? What could I do that would be, this is and they said, well, the churches watch James Bond very carefully. What church endorses James Bond? He kills a lot of people and he goes to bed with a lot of women. I'm not sure how many churches advocate his way of life.
Right.
And then what we were going to do, because I was going to do the plot line about the bombing of a skyscraper in Manhattan by a religious group. There was a lot of questions, about that. But you can go as far back as Ian Fleming's Live and Let Die. When Bond first comes into New York and Felix Leiter is driving him over the bridge, and they're looking at Manhattan, down below, and Felix Leiter says, look at it, James, the biggest bomb site in the world. And that's 1955. You think it's any less now? I don't think so. So, but the only thing is I kept fighting them on changes, and I don't know why I gave in on this, because the end of it, I had introduced a woman character that was with one of the lead bad guys, and he gets killed early on in the book. And my thought was that when the big ending happens, the woman comes after Bond to kill him. And they meet over Rockefeller Center, and they're always trying to find very visual places to take these scenes. It's a kind of a Hitchcock kind of influence. Like, okay, let's set this in a place that looks visually dynamic. And so Bond, the woman comes after him, and they got her in his gun sights, and he sees her face, and he realizes that he's her Blofeld. He killed the man she loved. And I know that moment would have just had power to it. And I don't know, they changed the ending. And to this day, they were wrong. That's all I can say. They were wrong. And I should have fought for that ending. But they had been very nice about giving it on other things, and I let it go, and so I regret it to this day.
Right. Lady Rawhide, and I think your daughter was actually dressed up as that. And,
Yes.
and if I'm...
Not my idea.
Not your idea. And what was Lady Rawhide, and how did your daughter become involved in it? Because I think even the illustrations of the character are of your daughter still, right?
Well, that's when Dynamite did some scurrilous stuff, and Mike Netzer drew that from a photograph of Lauren and I, with Lauren as Lady Rawhide. I created all those characters. Part of it, like when I was talking about doing a monthly book, and I realized there's no way I could do a monthly women in it. And so when whether it's the Black Panther or whether it's Zorro, James Bond, whatever it is, I'm going over the thing. This is what I really like, and I don't care about this, and trying to get where you reflect the characters accurately. And I thought, well, I need a woman character in here, and that was basically the start of Lady Rawhide. There was a lot of discussion about her. At first, I had her name Lady Rawhide. Then I'd gone out to dinner with Marsha and a woman friend of hers. And I changed the name to, I think Jim had questioned me on whether we should use Lady Rawhide. And I changed it to Lady Mayhem. And I said this at the table when I'm out to dinner with Marsha and this woman, Leslie. And Leslie says, well, sounds like Lady Rawhide's a better name. You know, Rawhide's tough, it endures. Mayhem sounds like a woman out of control. And I said, well, you're absolutely right. And I called Jim back. I said, no, Jim, it's Lady Rawhide again. And, you know, Jim was just terrific. He said, Don's idiosyncrasies again. Like, this is what he needs. So, and I, you know, Jim, we had samples done by different artists. And I gave a Lady Rawhide page, one of the double page spread with Zorro, like jumping tornado over these chimneys, rocks, and coming toward the audience, and not an easy double page spread to do. Man, Mike did a knockout job on it. Mm-hmm. I can't remember what the fourth page was, but anyhow, once again, I was really glad I lucked out, chose the right guy. The thing in the beginning was Mike didn't have a lot of exposure to Zorro. And so like he kept thinking of the Batman connection. And the first pages that he drew, like Zorro's face was really grim. I said, that's Batman, Mike. That's not Zorro. Zorro comes into this. He really believes in what he's doing. He believes he can get it done. He believes he's doing it for the right reasons and that he can make it come out right. And he really has this lively persona. And then once Mike got it, I sent him some Disney Zorros because part of, again, with Zorro Productions, I said, if I can't do the Disney Zorro people, if I can't do Sergeant Garcia, if I can't do Bernardo or Captain Monasterio, I'm not interested in doing the book. They said, no, you could, and the great thing was that I had Jim in my corner. And when a book needs an advocate, and as Lady Rawhide often did, there was one point where they wanted to censor something from the book. And I had worked up in my head, so I have to quit the book. I know where I'm going. And if they're having problems with this, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that down the line. And I'm sitting in Jim's office. I've worked up this big speech in my head over the weekend, telling Jim why I have to quit the book and I can't do it anymore. And I think I get two sentences out. He said, Jim said, wait a minute, Don, are you telling me you can't write the book you want to write? I said, yeah, because he said, and Jim gets on the phone, calls him up and said, if Don can't write the book he wants to write, we're out of the Zorro business. Now, if you have an editor in chief that will do that for you, you better praise that person, love them to death.
That's great. Alex, when I hear any talk of sheep fucking, I'm thinking it's time to wrap things up.
But that's also a Western reference, possibly. So I would say, Don, thanks so much, really, for hanging out with us today and going through your career the way you have. You have really great stories. You tell them so well, and I just love the passion that you have as you live it and as you discuss it. And really, thanks for making that so evident today. And really, you're awesome. And we are big fans of yours. Thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Alex.